Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. My job is to sort letters to Santa. There's only one rule. I worked at the post office 2 weeks ago. That's not euphemism, and it's not meant to sound mysterious. I've been there since I was 21, sorting, scanning, moving things from one place to another so other people can forget about them. It's stable work, quiet work, the kind of job where nothing interesting is supposed to happen. Every year, around mid-November, I get rotated into a seasonal role. Officially, I'm assigned to the no-response division. Unofficially, I'm the person who sorts the letters addressed to Santa that will never receive an answer. Most people don't realize how many of those come in. Kids still write physical letters. Parents still encourage it. Schools still make an activity. By the time those envelopes reach us, they're already dead ends. Addresses that don't exist, names that aren't real, return labels written in blocky pencil handwriting. The machinery flags them automatically. They get pulled before routing and dropped into our department. We don't respond to them. We don't forward them to charities. We don't read them in full. That last part is a rule. It's been a rule since the late 90s, according to my supervisor. Long before I started, long before she did. The explanation they give during training is simple and rehearsed. Children sometimes write about personal matters in their letters, family issues, home situations. It's not our place to read private information that was not meant for us. So we skim. We confirm it's addressed to Santa, stamp it as no response, log it, and file it away. You're allowed to read the opening line, maybe two. You're not allowed to finish it, ever. People joke about it the first year. They think it's superstition, or some old HR leftover nobody bothered to remove. Somebody always asks what happens if you do finish one. The supervisor never answers directly. She just says it results in immediate termination. I believe that was all it meant for a long time. I stopped finding the rule funny 3 Christmases ago. That was when I learned what happens after termination. It's a tight-knit secret among the people who get roped into it. And you're only told after everyone thinks you won't say anything to anyone. They don't escort you out with security. They don't make a scene. You're just told to gather your things and leave the building. Your credentials are deactivated sometime later that day. Your access to internal systems disappears. To everyone else, it looks like you quit or got fired for something mundane. What happens next isn't in any handbook. It starts the same way every time. Within a day or two, the person mentions they feel watched. Maybe they laugh it off at first and blame stress. Then they describe something taller than it should be, standing too far away to make sense. A shape, a silhouette that doesn't move when they move. By the 4th or 5th day, they stop laughing. They all describe it the same way. A black figure, at least 12 feet tall, proportion wrong, hands stretched to its shins, standing upright like it's pretending to be human. It wears a Santa hat. A real one, red, white trim, cheap felt. The hat never changes. It never falls. It never reacts to weather. It doesn't chase them. It doesn't speak. Every day, it's a little closer. It can stand across the street, at the end of a grocery aisle, on a sidewalk in full daylight. Other people walk through it like it isn't there. Nobody notices it. Nobody reacts. That's how they know it's meant only for them. The stalking lasts 12 days. On the 13th, they die. The post office doesn't acknowledge the connection. Officially, those people suffer unrelated accidents or medical emergencies. Unofficially, nobody and no response breaks the rule anymore. Except I did, because some of the letters aren't normal. Every once in a while, rare, but often enough that we dread it, you find a crumpled envelope sealed with red wax instead of glue. No postage, no return address. just a name written carefully in pencil, as if the writer didn't want to risk spelling it wrong. Those letters are the reason the rule exists. We're meant to set them aside in a locked drawer and alert supervision immediately. No logging, no scanning. They are taken at the end of the month. Every single one of them is addressed to Santa. I'd seen 11 in my entire career before last week. The 12th had my nephew's name on it. Same first name, same last name. Even the way the pencil curved on the first letter looked wrong in a familiar way. My brother has a 7-year-old son. He writes his name the same way on birthday cards. Too big at the front, trailing smaller letters like he gets tired halfway through. I didn't open it right away. I stood there for a long time, staring at the seal, telling myself coincidences happen and kids share names. I told myself that red wax meant nothing, that plenty of children have uncles who work at the post office. I used a sick day and left immediately and drove straight to my brother's house. He laughed when I told him the envelope, told me I was overthinking it, said his kid probably found his wax stamp he used for work and wanted to be fancy. When I asked if his son had written a letter to Santa recently, his smile faded just a little. He said yes, but he didn't see anything alarming, just the usual stuff. Toys, candy, video games. He asked why I cared so much. I didn't have an answer that didn't sound insane. That night, I dreamed about the drawer at work. It was open and the letter was gone. The next morning, I broke the rule. I told myself I'd only read enough to confirm it wasn't really his. I told myself I'd stop if it got personal. I told myself I wouldn't finish it. I was wrong. The letter was written in pencil, neat but deliberate. No spelling mistakes. No childish phrasing. It thanked Santa. It thanked him for the last gift. Not for toys or games, but for a piece of candy that had made Mommy stop crying. It said Santa had been right, that doing the bad thing worked, and nobody knew. It promised that this time would be even better, that stealing wouldn't be enough. And hurting animals felt too small now that he understood what Santa really wanted. It listed sins like chores. It ended by asking what Santa wanted next, because Christmas was coming and he wanted to be a good boy. I don't remember putting the letter down. I only remember my supervisor standing behind me, telling me to hand over my badge. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She looked tired, like she'd seen this exact situation before and hated it every time. She told me I was terminated for violating confidentiality policy and that I needed to leave the building immediately. She didn't warn me about anything else. I didn't leave work right away. I sat in my car in the parking lot for almost an hour with the letter in my lap. I kept expecting someone to knock on the window and tell me this had gone far enough, that whatever point they were trying to make had landed and I could come back inside. No one did. People clocked out as time went on, walked past my car without looking twice. I drove to my brother's house because there wasn't anywhere else it made sense to go. He answered the door with his son still awake behind him, cartoon voices echoing down the hallway. The normalcy of it made what I was holding feel obscene, like I brought something diseased into a clean room. I asked if we could talk privately. He hesitated, then stepped outside with me, shutting the door behind him. "Why are you holding Luca's letter?" We were standing on the porch. The light above us flickered every few seconds. I hadn't noticed it doing that before. "It came to my work," I said. "I need you to read it." "You open my kid's mail?" "Yes, but you'll understand when you open it." That made it worse. Somehow, he took the envelope from my hand and turned it over, frowning at the wax seal. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" "Seriously, read it." He broke the seal with his thumb and started scanning the page. I watched his eyes move, line by line. When he stopped, he stared at the paper like he'd lost his place. "This isn't funny," he said. "I know." He folded the letter once. "Did you write this shit?" "No." "Did you put him up to this?" "No." "You really expect me to believe this came from a real..." He stopped himself, laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You can't be serious, Matt. I got fired today. I wouldn't risk my job for something like this." "That doesn't help." I tried not to read it. I wasn't supposed to, but when I saw his name, You're talking about rules again, he said. That stupid Santa rule you're always on about this time of year? It's not stupid, I said. It's a thing for a reason. So now my son is a reason? His voice was louder now. Behind him, the TV laughed on cue. You think my own son is fucking hurting people? No, I said quickly. I think something is asking him to. He stared at me, waiting for a grin that didn't come. You're a fucking sick man, he said finally after staring daggers at me. It's been happening to other people. Co-workers. Once you finish one of these letters I took. This is enough. You don't get to come into my house and say ridiculous shit like this. Just listen to me, just for once, can you? You need help, Matt. Seriously, you're fucking crazy. There's a thing, my voice dropped without me meaning it to. It starts watching you. Tall, wears a Santa hat, 12 days and then... Get out. Don't talk about my son like that. Don't talk to me unless you get your shit together. I'm not talking about him, I said. I'm talking about what's coming. He opened the door behind him. Stay out of my fucking house. And don't come back until you can admit you made this up. But Christmas? Don't, he said. Do not bring that bullshit into my home. I stepped back further onto the porch. He didn't hesitate before closing the door. The lock clicked. Behind the door, my nephew laughed at something on the TV. In the silence that followed, the flickering porch light finally went out. At the end of the street, something tall stood perfectly still, waiting. I left my brother's house, not taking my eyes off of it. When I got home, it stood across the street from my apartment, partially hidden by a lamppost that only reached its upper thigh. The Santa hat sat perfectly on its head, bright red against a body that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. I didn't see it move. I watched from my living room window until my eyes started to hurt, until my reflection layered itself over the dark glass and made me doubt the shape even existed. When I looked away and looked back again, it was still at the end of the street, standing just past the stop sign. Cars drove past it without slowing. Headlights cut through its legs and came out the other side unchanged. A woman jogged directly through the space it occupied, earbuds and breath fogging the cold air. She never noticed the height of the things she'd passed. That night, I didn't close the curtains. I wanted to know if it would approach while I slept, if it only moved when I wasn't looking. It didn't move. The Santa hat was the brightest thing on the street. On the second day, it was closer. It stood across from my building beneath a street lamp. The light didn't reveal anything, only traced its outline like something pasted onto the world. I left early, before sunrise, telling myself that if I passed it quickly enough, I could prove it couldn't interact with me. As I walked by, I felt pressure behind my eyes, like I was remembering something I'd forgotten. It lasted less than a second. When I turned, it was still behind me. That night, I dreamed of red wax softening in my hands. On the third day, it was in the parking lot. It stood between my car and the exit. I walked around it without stopping. I remember feeling angry more than afraid. Angry that it was allowed to exist like this, violating the basic rules of proximity and consequence. A man leaned against my car to tie his shoe. His shoulder passed through its leg without comment. For a moment, by habit, I drove toward the post office before remembering I no longer worked there. On the fourth day, it began appearing indoors. I saw it at the end of the frozen food aisle, its head nearly brushing the hanging signs. People pushed carts through it. A child ran past me laughing when the cold air hit their face. I left my groceries and walked out. That night, Christmas music started to feel like a warning. On the fifth day, it followed me to my brother's street. It stood on the sidewalk in front of his porch, feet almost touching the step. I watched my brother walk through that space later, holding his son's hand, not slowing, not noticing. The porch light turned on. The door closed. The thing didn't leave. On the sixth day, I stopped trying to explain. I called the non-emergency line, a therapist, anyone who might give us a shape that wasn't fatal. I talked about stress, unemployment, anxiety. Everyone heard exactly what they needed to hear. That night, it stood at the edge of my building's lot, closer than before. I closed the curtain for the first time and still woke up convinced something brushed the walls. On the seventh day, it was in the elevator to my apartment. The doors opened and it was already there, folded just enough to fit. A woman stepped in beside me and leaned against his leg without realizing it, frowning slightly at the unexpected cold. I got off 2 floors early. The rest of the ride creaked like it was carrying more weight than it should. On the 8th day, it appeared in reflections first, in the dark screen of my phone, in the microwave door, always behind me. When I turned, it was in a room where it needed to be to remain just out of reach. I never heard it breathe. On the 9th day, it stopped giving me space. I turned corners and almost walked into it. I started holding my hands out in front of me, afraid of colliding with it like misplaced furniture. That night, it stood at the foot of my bed and leaned forward just enough to make the Santa hat dip. I didn't sleep. On the 10th day, I tried to leave the city. I drove until the roads thinned and the lights fell away. I locked myself in a rest stop bathroom just to breathe. It waited by the sinks. I turned around and went home. On the 11th day, it no longer followed me. It waited in places before I arrived, positioned where it made sense, as if it had always been part of the layout. If it has eyes, I never saw them. If it has a face, I don't think I would survive seeing it. On the 12th day, it stood in my bedroom, not at the foot of the bed. Closer, it bent at the waist until its head filled my vision. I smelled wax. I smelled paper. The Santa hat slid forward just enough that I thought I might finally see what was underneath. Then it folded itself back into the corner, impossibly small, and waited with me until morning. Tomorrow is the 13th day. He's standing just a few feet in front of me now. I'm gonna die tomorrow night. I need ideas, anything to help. I'll try anything. Please. Story 2. I had trouble sleeping when I was younger. Last night I found out why. It started when I was 8 years old. At the time, I had begun to have these jolts for my sleep. Some point near midnight, I would suddenly be thrown awake. It was like those moments in which you would just be about to sleep, but your body suddenly acts like you are falling. Only these jolts would cause me to feel like I was being thrown into the air. My parents at first chalked up to insomnia. School at the time was stressful for me with all sorts of new classes and information being taught, so I don't blame them for thinking that at first. However, the jolts were very rare at first, but over time began to happen every night, and slowly I would wake up with more panic, screaming and throwing punches at threat which wasn't present. 5 days after these more aggravated jolts began, my parents began to think that insomnia was less likely. They began to ask if I had problems at school, things like bullies or mean teachers. I hadn't really had any bullies at the time, and all the teachers were nice, so the answer was always no. They took me to a few checkups with a local child's clinic. They found nothing physically wrong, but they noted that I had much more self-inflicted trauma, whatever the hell that was supposed to mean. They gave my parents a prescription for sleeping pills and suggested that I take one an hour before bed, hopefully to keep me asleep. These pills never worked at all. While I did feel more drowsy before bed, it never stopped the jolts from happening, and they continue to happen every time, at midnight. This went on for a while, and I just wanted the horror to end. I eventually asked my parents if there was a sleep doctor. They told me that while there was no such thing as a sleep doctor, they could have me visit psychiatrists. Soon enough, I was sitting in an office with several toys, fidgets, and books scattered about, as Dr. Cole, my psychiatrist at the time, proceeded to ask me several questions. They were ridiculously simple, with questions such as, how old are you? Have you always felt like seeking psychiatric help? Do you sleep well? Do you eat healthy? And so on. Then after those questions, he took out several papers, the ones with splotches on them to see how the patient's mind works on identifying it. I swear to God, every single one of those papers had 2 large, pitch black circles on either side. So dark it felt like I could stick my hand in and lose it forever. I know that some of them may have had features similar to that. But for me, each one had the exact same spots, empty voids that seemed to stare directly into me. On about the 9th paper, I burst into tears and tried to cower under the desk. as Dr. Cole restacked the papers, slid them into a folder, and began to fill out a report. Later that day, my parents were told that I could have a case of mild schizophrenia, where my brain forced images I didn't want to see onto the paper. My parents were once again given a prescription for me. My father made a fuss, objecting to having his youngest son take pills for a real medical disorder, rather than having it treated. Safe to say, I didn't go back there again. For months, I had to deal with these jolts all the damn time, and it got so bad that I stopped sleeping in my room anymore and just decided to sleep with my brother David. David was 10 at the time, and honestly, he didn't want to have to put up with my shit anymore, but he still let me sleep with him if it got me to shut up. After some time, my birthday came up. The party was supposed to be an excuse for me to get outside time, but with my midnight jolts, my parents decided to let us all stay inside and bond together more. At the party were 3 of my closest friends, 2 of which I was neighbors with, the last one being a classmate. Along with my friends were 2 of my cousins, who were at least 5 years older than my brother, but still enjoyed coming over to hang out with us from time to time. During the party, I somehow managed to forget about the jolts, as everyone played games, talked about upcoming events, and most importantly, laughed at absurdly basic jokes. In the evening, my brother and I grabbed out our sleeping bags. Then David went to set up the pull-out bed from the couch, while I collected blankets and pillows. David stood in front of everyone and told them the sleeping bags were for me and him only, and that the couch bed would be up for claim. Then I smirked as I told him to duke out the bed. I had expected a thumb war or a game of rock, paper, scissors, but instead, our cousins volunteered to sleep on the floor, while my friends arm wrestled for the couch bed. After deciding the bedding arrangements, we stayed up for a good 2 hours after normal bedtime, daring each other to try staying awake longer than the other. Of course, I was the last to fall asleep. As I drifted off, I smiled from the whole day of fun, despite only really staying inside and laughing until we couldn't breathe. Then, about midnight, I could feel myself being thrown up out of sleep, and the urge to scream and lash out at the closest thing flew by. But my voice, I couldn't scream. My mouth was open, and yet my vocal cords refused to open up. My arms, already in the sleeping bag, didn't move. I remember my cousin saying he had moments like this often, sleep paralysis, where you wake up too quickly for your body to register it and unlock your movements. I scanned the room to see if anyone was around. The only things I saw was a mess of board games and snacks, my brother, cousins, and friends asleep, and the large window to the side of the front door. My cousin had always told me that in his paralyzed state, he would always try to keep looking at different things since he knew that the mind would eventually get bored and try to create things like monsters. My brother told him that looking around would encourage the mind to create the demons. My cousin just shrugged and told him that he never saw anything that wasn't there before. I kept looking at every part of the room I could to make sure nothing changed. When I was satisfied, I closed my eyes and tried to go to sleep. Then, shortly after closing my eyes, there was a rustling sound in the bush right outside the large window. My eyes shot open, and I turned to see what was. I was horrified. The thing rather, standing outside my window was tall and dark. He seemed to be wearing a black hoodie of sorts, but his face, I could never forget it, a dark, yet pale face, no discernible mouth or nose, and the eyes, they were exactly like the large dots I saw on the paper in Dr. Cole's office, but they seemed more hollow. Somehow, I managed to scrunch my face up into a scowl, hoping that he would see my anger and leave. He did in fact see the scowl, and turned toward the door and walked to it. I blinked just to make sure I wasn't seeing things, but he was now standing inside of my home, just in front of the window, terrified of blinking. I forced my eyes to stay open. The thing started to walk closer, slowly. My eyes watered, and I fought as hard as I could against the urge to blink, until suddenly I did. When my eyes opened up, the thing was gone. Scanning the room, nothing was out of the ordinary. I realized that my body was unlocked from paralysis, and I rushed to my brother to wake him up. "David, David," I shouted. "There's a man, I saw him. He's hiding in our house." My brother stirred and turned over from me. "Come on, David. We need to wake up Mom and Dad." "It's late, dude. Go back to sleep." My brother groaned. "No, I can't sleep, David. He's in our home. He could be waiting to kill us." I shouted back. David slowly got up, stretched his arms, and said in a yawn, How about we look for this man? And if we find him, we can go get Mom and Dad. Deal. I nodded. David got up, and we began to look around in the living room, under the couch bed, under the coffee table, and we even checked the hallway closet. There was nothing. We went back to bed, and David almost instantly fell asleep. I knew what I saw. I knew it. My jolts after that night stopped. I never knew why. So for a while, I just thought I was going through a fear phase where I was afraid of everything. I'm currently 19 years old, and last night, I was proven wrong when I experienced a jolt, and outside my window was a man with no eyes. Story 3. I was in a coma for 3 months, and I saw heaven. Things had gone wrong up there. It happened whilst I was sailing in the bay. The last thing I saw was a wooden boom of my boat wheeling toward me, and then stars and galaxies rushed by, all adhering to some dizzying curvature, before I finally woke in my apartment. I remember that I screamed, not only from the horror of being sent overboard on choppy waters, and not even from the horror of beholding a cosmic nightmare I didn't understand. No, I screamed because my apartment wasn't my apartment at all. I knew as much in my gut. When I looked down at my English Springer Spaniel, Bonnie, I felt much the same. She wasn't Bonnie at all. She was exact in terms of appearance and temperament, but entirely inexact. Her glinting brown eyes unnerved me to the extent that I quickly looked away. Perfect. That was the problem. Everything was perfect. As I staggered to the hallway, I wondered whether the bad dream was my boating accident or this. It was then that I cast my eyes to the curtains drawn across my living room windows. But before I opened them, there came knocking. I remember answering the front door to find a pristine white hallway, which wasn't the hallway I knew. And standing in that hallway was a man of average build, average height, and average face, perhaps brown hair and eyes. My memory of him is shrouded in fog, as is much of our conversation. The exact words. The exact meaning of his exact words. Hello, Finnegan. I'm your guide. Guide. I repeated. I think he nodded. There is no gentle way to do this. The guide raised his hand, and with that came dazzling white light from the apartment behind me. Dazzling enough to bounce off the corridor walls and temporarily blind me. I shielded my face for a moment, but the guide gently took my arm and lowered it. Then he twisted me around to face my living room windows, and we started to walk towards him. My jaw dropped. Outside was not my neighborhood, but community hemmed in by 40 feet tall walls of large reddish stone blocks, embedded with various jewels. At intervals were gates bearing bars of pearl and topped with pointed railheads, themselves topped with strange rippling shapes, too distant to discern, but clearly blemishes on otherwise opulent exterior. Blemishes to my eyes, at least. They disconcerted me. Their movements, they sat or wriggled, at odds with the splendor of this place. Within the community itself, which spanned perhaps a square mile, the roads were built of gold that appeared more liquid than solid. It shimmered beneath the well. There ought to have been a sun, but light emanated from no clear source, and overhead hung white clouds more than blue sky, assuring me that there was nothing earthly about this place. Lining the roads were hundreds of four-story buildings with brutalist white brickwork. Through the windows were ordinary homes and not-so-ordinary homes. My stomach lurched as I looked upon such oddities behind those glass panes as luscious woodlands and black voids, and even things other than people. A tremendously tall and broad-shouldered humanoid, body laden with scales, stood and waved at me. He had the most horrible smile, a smile not egregious, as such, but hollow. I let out a little grunt of fear and nearly lost my balance, but the guide caught me. "You are dead, Finnegan," he confirmed. I say confirmed because I'd already known that, of course, but hearing it was quite something else. "What is this place?" I asked. "The place at which all souls eventually rest, no matter the world on which they are born and no matter the religion," the guide said, nodding at the scaly creature which had terrified me. Every soul is granted a personal paradise. You are standing within yours. Is this heaven, if you like? But I'm an atheist. No matter the religion, he repeated. This is a place for the righteous, not the pious. Faith doesn't matter in the end. All religions speak fragments of truth, gleaned from tales spun by those who glimpse heaven before returning to the land of the living. You will join them in time. Finnegan, your body persists in a between state back on Earth. And you my guide here? That's right. I pointed beyond the stone walls and the pearly gates. Then tell me, what's that place? Beyond our gated paradise. The sky was filled with neither white clouds nor patches of blue. There was no light in that place. Only dark, but it was no void. I sensed something within the black, and it made my stomach twist just to look upon it. There are many names a human might use for that place. Hell, perhaps. Hell? I repeated fearfully. The guide narrowed his eyes at me, and there was something horrid within them. Something impossibly deep, and perhaps darker even in the land of hell beyond the pearly gates. I blinked my eyes in dread, and jumped out of my skin to find us standing outside, standing on that liquid gold road, which felt warm and soft beneath my feet. I looked up at the apartment block, searching for the reptilian creature I'd seen. I thought of its smile. I thought of Bonnie's eyes. Perfection. Well, perfection didn't sit properly. It was almost a relief when I screeched in horror, having seen something worthy of a frightened reaction, something that challenged this false utopia. I could clearly see those strange, rippling shapes atop the gates, one skewered on each spike railhead, skeletal bodies, still alive, left to squirm as those gates pierced their body for all eternity. But this wasn't the only reason I screeched. From the black of hell, through the bars of the pearly gates, arms wormed with outstretched hands, grasping at our little slice of heaven, appearing to me like the undead from an old film. I suppose we were the undead. I saw glimpses of flesh and monstrous spider-like limbs, demons of the underworld. A woman's scream cut off my thoughts. It came from within heaven, a little way down the Golden Street. The guide, and I turned to face a human lady barreling towards us. You need to kill me. Kill me. Make this eternity end. Make. The guide extended both his arms and brought the woman to a halt, with palms against her eyes. Just like that, her screams became muted and unintelligible groans. She stood and writhed on the spot, metaphysical form glued still by the guide. I see you found your way over the wall and into paradise, Helen, but there will be no sadness here, no anger, no boredom, only peace and order. The guide began to pull his hands away from Helen's face, and I screamed as translucent strands of white gunk peeled out of her sockets, a sight more grotesque than any mortal torture. For I knew the guide had removed something far more important than her physical innards. He had stolen a part of Helen herself. When the white gunk was severed fully from her metaphysical body, or soul, she was left a spiritually lobotomized husk, and I think blissful ignorance would have been a gift. But this was not that, because I remember Helen smiling at the guide with tears in her eyes. Part of her zombified and fragmented soul understood what had happened to her. Happy, she whispered. Yes, the guide said. Happy. Helen, screamed a man from the gates. Oh, Helen. Helen, no. Let her die. Let us all die, you monster. I tried to cling to ignorance, but it was no use. I thought of the smiling reptilian and realized those weren't demons at the gates, standing alongside the humans. They were tortured souls from other worlds. And then I screamed as I saw the guide looking upon me, eyes no longer deep but infinite, an infinite black, stretching toward me like his inescapable arms. There was no outrunning or overpowering him. As his fleshy palms met my eyes, I felt a spiritual agony beyond having one's physical eyes torn from their sockets. But I understood only a fragment of Helen's pain, for the guide stopped after a mere moment, plucked only the slightest of strands from my eyes, enough to strip my agency. I smiled outwardly, but endured terror inwardly. That's better. But I mustn't take too much, he said. You still have to go back down there. Still have to function. Losing but a sliver of my sanity left me cold and horrified as I pictured what Helen and the other husks of that gated community must be enduring. What so many souls in that gated community of heaven had already endured for years, centuries, or millennia. This wasn't paradise. It was an illusion. I saw it all when the guide touched my eyes. Knowledge was a gift from him, or perhaps a side effect of our momentary connection. The Creator made a mistake when creating the universe, creating life on his many worlds. He misunderstood that life is beautiful because it is finite, because it ends, because it is imperfect. There is heavenliness to be found amidst the suffering. Up in heaven, however, there was no strife, no end, and no substance beneath the cookie-cutter sheen. It was then, with a tightening chest, that I understood it wasn't hell beyond the gates. It was old heaven. It had been abandoned when the people revolted, demanding an end to infinite perfection. That false and mind-numbing nightmare, only made worse when the guides tried to fix people by turning their complicated, anxious, and unhappy souls into hollowed-out ones, coming as close to killing their essences as possible, but serving them a worse fate of eternal torture as a mutated half-thing. The alternative, of course, was existing in the infinite dark and nothingness of what the last guide called hell. How did the Creator make a mistake? I wondered, isn't he almighty? The guide read my mind. Is a mother almighty because she creates life? The Creator is powerful and present and knowledgeable, but he is not omnipotent, omnipresent, or omniscient. You and countless other souls have a fiction in your mind of deities and angels. We are immortal, but not almighty. The rebels overpowered all but me. I winced and finally found the strength to speak. How? I retreated, unlike those undying fools up there, he said, nodding at the writhing guides atop the gate railheads. Those undying but broken fools. Yes, I could take them down, but why? They are little use to me now. Their minds are shattered. They need fixing as much as the billions of souls in the great dark. If I had the strength to do so, I would. You know, Helen is not the first to scale these walls. She is lucky to have received my mercy. But should she ask too much of me, she will go back out into the dark with them. He pointed towards old heaven. See, this is a lesson for when you come back here, Finnegan, and thank your merciful guide. Those black eyes bore holes through my very soul. The guide reached out a hand for me, and I found myself unwillingly leaning forwards to kiss it. The touch of it against my lips was akin to, well, nothing earthly. It was, perhaps, the primal terror one feels when facing one's end. Only that end was unending in this case. Whatever the feeling, which I still struggle to put into words, I managed only to shriek inwardly, once again, for I smiled outwardly. Thank you, I said, words put in my mouth by this monstrous thing. Bless you, child, he said. I will see you again, and you will enjoy your forever paradise, or you will face the forever dark. I was waking. I could feel it. I was fading back into reality, and that brought me no relief, because I knew one day I would die again and return to this afterlife. I was horrified at that prospect of choosing either the infinite black void of clamoring souls, begging for release, or becoming a zombified plaything for this megalomaniacal guide who was determined only to create a peaceful and ordered paradise, not to actually ensure the well-being of the souls. And I became aware of something. Perhaps I'd known it from the moment he knocked on my door, but as white enveloped me, I asked the one question to which I already knew the answer. You're not really one of the guides, are you? Was the thought circling my mind. Who are you? He did not respond. I woke in a hospital bed surrounded by family, and the doctors told me I'd been in a coma for 3 months. The whole ordeal had felt like 3 minutes to me. I don't know what I saw, but I am now terrified of dying, terrified of that infinite darkness. Whether I end up experiencing forever nothingness or forever insanity, both are forms of torture. Heaven has become hell. Story 4. I digitized some tapes of CIA. I broke one rule, and now I am blind. I'm dictating this to my phone's voice assistant, because I need to warn you about what happened. My hands are shaking so badly I can't type, And even if I could, I wouldn't be able to see the screen anymore. I should start at the beginning. Week 1, 3 months ago, I was barely making rent. I'm an audio restoration specialist. I clean up old recordings, digitize archives, that sort of thing. The work is sporadic, and I've been living on ramen and rejection emails for weeks when I saw the posting on an audio freelancing website. Archival specialist needed for government digitization project. $15,000 per week. Security clearance required. Remote work. Apply with resume. $15,000 a week. I applied immediately, figuring it was a scam. But 2 days later, my phone rang from a blocked number. Mr. Hayes? The woman's voice was flat, professional. This is Ms. Vickers with the Department of Archives Management. We've reviewed your application for the digitization project. Oh, great. Is this a real position? Yes. The work involves digitizing classified audio materials from Cold War-era research programs. You would work from home on our equipment. The material is sensitive. You would sign a non-disclosure agreement with severe penalties for breach. Do you accept? I said yes. Obviously. The next morning, 6 a.m. sharp, an unmarked white van pulled up outside my apartment. No company logo. No license plate I could make out. 2 men in plain clothes unloaded 17 boxes and made me sign for them without making eye contact. The whole thing took 4 minutes. Inside the boxes, a tape player I'd never seen before, industrial looking heavy, with a brass plate reading Sensory Unit 7, 342 tapes in numbered sleeves, a laptop with all the network hardware physically removed, and a sealed envelope labeled Protocols. Read immediately. The protocols were typed on thick, yellowed paper that looked decades old. Mandatory protocols for Project Eyes. 1. Work only between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. 2. 3. Digitize tapes in sequential order. Never skip. 4. 5. If you hear a child's voice, stop the tape immediately and call this number. Redacted. Do not continue listening. 6. 7. If you hear your own name, ignore it. It is a recording artifact. 8. 9. Never replay any section of tape. Forward only. 10. 11. If the tape player's red light blinks 3 times, leave your apartment for exactly 1 hour. Return only when the hour is complete. 12. 15. Keep all windows covered while working. 14. 15. You will sometimes hear knocking. Do not answer. Do not acknowledge it in any way. 16. 17. If you feel watched, you are. Continue working normally. 18. 19. Do not look at the tape player screen while recording. Keep your eyes on the laptop only. 20. Failure to follow these protocols will result in immediate termination of contract and legal action. I read through them twice. Some made sense. Working at night, NDAs, that's normal for classified work. The knocking thing was weird, but Rule 10 stopped me cold. The screen? I examined the tape player again. It was just a tape deck. Buttons for play, stop, fast forward. The brass identification plate. A VU meter. No screen anywhere. I called the number Ms. Vickers had used. Disconnected, but $15,000. I could catch up on rent, pay off my credit cards, actually eat something that didn't come in a styrofoam cup. I set up the equipment and covered my windows with bed sheets. At 11 p.m. exactly, I loaded the first tape. Tape 001, March 17, 1973. Heavy static, then a man's voice, tired and irritated. Interview with subject 12B, day 4 of observation period. Subject continues to insist the broadcast contain instructions, not hallucinations. When asked to describe the voice giving instructions, subject becomes nonverbal and aggressive. Sedation required. Continuing tomorrow. Click. Silence. Then a different voice, younger, almost cheerful. Subject 12B, can you hear us? Good. Now, how many fingers are we holding up? How many fingers, Thomas? A pause. Then screaming. Not startled screaming. The kind that comes from deep animal terror. The tape ran for 43 minutes. Most of it was at screaming, occasionally interrupted by the younger voice asking calm questions. What do you see now, Thomas? Are they closer? How many are watching you? I digitized it all, my stomach churning. When I finished, it was 12:20 a.m. 241 tapes left to go. The first week was like that. Disturbing but manageable. Psychological experiments from the 70s and 80s. Sensory deprivation. People claiming to receive transmissions. And one word kept repeating. Observation. Not like scientific observation. The researchers said it with a capital O, like it was a specific process. I didn't understand it yet, but I would. I heard the knocking for the first time on night 4. 3 soft raps on my door at 1:47 a.m. Rule 8, do not answer. Do not acknowledge. I kept working, but my hands were shaking. The knocking came 3 more times, evenly spaced, then stopped. On night 6, I heard my name. I was digitizing tape 034, an interview with someone from a remote viewing program. The subject was describing what they saw. Room. Empty. No, wait. There's someone. They're working. They're alone. They're... Then, clear as day. Hayes. M. Hayes. My blood went cold. My finger hovered over the stop button. But Rule 4 said to ignore it. Recording artifact. The subject continued. M. Hayes is listening to us right now. He doesn't understand yet. He thinks he's digitizing old recordings. Should we show him? Static. I sat there staring at the laptop screen for what felt like an hour. How could they know my name? These tapes were from the 70s, but I didn't replay it. Rule 5. I loaded number 035 with trembling hands. Week 2. The content got worse. Much worse. Tape 041 was footage. You could hear the film projector of Operation Backward Eye. A doctor described showing subjects prepared visual stimuli to test if human consciousness could be accessed from observation space. The subjects became violent. One bit through their tongue. Another broke their fingers one by one while laughing. I had to pause the tape twice to throw up. The doctor stayed calm throughout. Subject exhibits extreme aversion response. Attempting to remove own eyes. Applying restraints. I kept telling myself it was just a job. The money kept appearing. $15,000 every Friday. I kept working. The knocking came every night now with varying patterns. Sometimes 3 raps. Sometimes rhythms like Morse code. On night 9, it stopped mid-pattern. Then scratching. Something scratched at the bottom of my door. Light. Exploratory. Like fingers testing the gap. I wanted to run. I wanted to open the door and scream at whatever was out there, but I kept my eyes on a laptop. The scratching continued for 2 minutes, then stopped. But I'd felt it, that sensation from Rule 9, being watched, not like someone at a window, like something was behind my eyes, looking out through them, a weight in my skull, pressure behind my forehead, like someone was wearing my face from the inside. The feeling faded after the scratching stopped, but returned every night after. I started sleeping with the lights on during the day. Not that it helped. Week 3. By week 3, I was barely sleeping. The tapes haunted me during the day. The knocking haunted me at night, but I kept going. The money. I kept telling myself it was about the money, but tape 089 broke something in me. 41 minutes of static, and a man's voice repeating. They're in the walls now. They're in the walls now. I almost stopped it, almost called Ms. Vickers, but I listened to the whole thing. At the end, a different voice. Subject 303 has been vocalizing for 6 hours. Brain activity normal. Subject appears conscious but unresponsive. Eyes open but don't track movement. Pupils don't respond to light. It's as if something else is using them to look. As if subject 303 is still in there. But something else is borrowing his eyes. We believe he's experiencing observation space from the wrong side. Click. I sat there in the dark for a long time. The phrase wrong side wouldn't leave my head. Like there were 2 sides of observation. The watcher and the watched. Subject 303 had ended up on both at once. That night, while digitizing tape 095, I noticed something in the brass plate's reflection. my laptop screen, but also a faint rectangular glow underneath where the tape sat. I hadn't imagined it. There was something there. I examined the tape player closer. A hairline seam in the metal beneath the tape deck, like a panel, or a screen facing upward, hidden under the mechanism. Rule 10. Do not look at the tape player screen while recording. There was a screen built into the bottom of the tape deck, facing up. The tape covered it while playing. I kept my eyes on the laptop, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Week 4, the tapes got more specific about observation space, and I was starting to piece together what they meant, what I was really doing here. Tape 107 was an interview with someone who they referred to as observation space expert. We believe observation space exists perpendicular to normal reality. When you watch something, you create a connection. Most of the time, it's one way, but in certain conditions, the connection can become bidirectional. The thing you're watching can watch you back, and if it watches long enough, it can use that connection to cross over. My stomach dropped. Cross over. Into what? Into whom? Tape 114 answered that question. A woman's voice. Subject 421 has been in the observation chamber 96 hours. Continues to insist entities are communicating through playback device. Describes them as us, but observing from permission side. Claims they can only fully manifest when seen at the right angle. Pause. Shuffling papers. Subject has gouged out their own eyes with their fingernails. Screaming he couldn't let them finish watching. That he had to close the window. Subject expired at 14:33. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The pressure behind my eyes was so strong now I could barely focus. I understood what Subject 421 had done, why they'd done it. Permission side and close the window. Something could watch us from observation space, but needed permission, needed us to look at them, create that bidirectional connection. Our eyes became a window they could look through or climb through, and I've been creating that connection for 4 weeks. It was 3:47 a.m. I should have stopped. I should have walked away right then. But I loaded tape 115, and the red light on the tape player blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Rule 6, leave for exactly 1 hour. I grabbed my coat and ran. I didn't walk to the diner. I ran, my heart pounding, looking over my shoulder the whole way. I sat in that booth watching the clock, knowing something was happening in my apartment, knowing I didn't want to go back. But after 60 minutes exactly, I did. The smell hit me first. Copper, thick and organic, like a butcher shop, and something else underneath, something sweet and rotten like meat left in the sun. All my windows were open. The bed sheets covering them were torn into strips on the floor. The tape player was still running, but tape 115 had been removed. In its place, a new tape, no number, no sleeve, blank white casing, and the tape deck assembly had been pulled apart. The hidden screen was visible, 4 inches wide LCD, glowing faintly, now exposed, and it was showing something. Grainy black and white footage, security camera style, of my apartment, of my desk, of me, sitting there, working. The footage was from earlier tonight. I could see the timestamp in the corner. I watched myself load tapes, adjust my laptop, take a sip of water. But there was something else in the frame. Behind me, in the corner of my apartment, a shape, tall, impossibly thin, like someone had grabbed a human silhouette and stretched it vertically. It stood perfectly still in every frame. I spun around. My apartment was empty. I looked back. The footage continued. The shape hadn't moved, but I could see it clearly now. It had been there for hours, standing behind me while I worked, watching me through the camera. Then it moved, frame by frame, approaching my past self, leaning down, its head, if it had a head, lowering toward my neck. My phone rang. Ms. Vickers. Mr. Hayes. You're looking at the screen. Not a question. What the fuck is this? What are these tapes? What is that thing? Stop looking at the screen. Look away right now. Why? Tell me what's happening. The tapes aren't recordings, Mr. Hayes. They're observations. documentation of observation space research. Every tape exposes you to that space. The more you watch, the more you create connections between our world and observation space. And the things there, they've been watching you back. What things? The subjects call them watchers. They exist in observation space. They want to cross over but need permission. They need someone to create a stable bidirectional connection. A window. That's what the screen shows you, what the watchers see. And if you look at it, if you see yourself being observed from their side, what happens? You give them permission to finish. You become the window. They use your eyes to look into our world. And once they're inside, once they're using your vision, Mr. Hayes, stop looking at the screen. But I kept watching. The shape in the footage opened something. Not a mouth. A space where a mouth should be. Inside were eyes. Hundreds. Thousands. All different sizes. All crammed into that impossible space. All watching. All pointed at me. The protocols were designed to prevent this. Ms. Vickers said, voice cracking, the night hours isolate you. The covered windows remove external reference points. But Rule 10 was the most important. The screen shows you what they see. If you see that, if you understand you're being observed from observation space, you complete the connection. You give them permission. The shape straightened, turned, looked directly at the camera. At me, something shifted, a tearing in my head, like my consciousness was being pulled backward through my own eyes, like my vision was a tunnel, and something was rushing up it from the wrong direction. The pressure behind my eyes exploded into pain. I could feel them, not just watching. Inside, behind my eyes, using my vision as a doorway, I turned toward my apartment. It was there, standing in my living room, the same impossible thinness, wrong angles that hurt to perceive, and its face, the space that opened, was full of eyes, but they weren't looking at me. They were eyeing me, behind my eyeballs, watching out through my pupils, using my eyes as cameras, observing reality from inside a human being. I understood what the tapes had been, what I'd been doing for 4 weeks. The tapes weren't documentation. They were a selection process. The government was trying to find someone who could survive exposure to observation space, someone who could create a stable connection. They'd lost all the others. Maybe I would be different. The protocols weren't protection. They were preparation, isolating me, conditioning me, making me vulnerable. Every tape opened me a little more. Every night made the connection stronger. And the knocking, the scratching, that had been the watchers. Testing, checking if I was ready. Ms. Vickers was screaming through the phone. Mr. Hayes, you have to end the observation. It's the only way to close the window. You have to. The shape moved closer. I could see my reflection in some of its thousands of eyes. Hundreds of me, all trapped in those pupils, all screaming silently. I understood what Subject 421 had done, why they gouged out their own eyes. You can't observe without eyes. And if you can't observe, the watchers can't observe through you. The only way to close a window is to destroy it. I grabbed a letter opener from my desk drawer. I want you to understand, they were behind my eyes, using them. I could feel them there like pressure, like weight, like fingers wrapped around my optic nerves. The only way to sever the connection was to destroy their cameras. So I did. I destroyed the window. Now, that was 6 weeks ago. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The doctor said I'd lost both eyes. The damage was too severe. I'd severed the optic nerves completely. The CIA cleaned out my apartment while I was in the ICU. Men in hazmat suits, according to my neighbor. They took everything. The tapes, the player, the laptop, all of it. But they paid me in full. All 12 weeks. $180,000 appeared in my account with a memo. Contract fulfilled. Ms. Vickers sent one final email, read aloud by the hospital screen reader. Mr. Hayes, thank you for your service. The observation has been terminated. The connection has been severed. You will not be contacted again. We recommend you do not discuss this experience for your own safety and for reasons of national security. I'm completely blind now. The doctors say the scarring on my optic nerves is inconsistent with physical trauma. Like something burned them out from the inside before I ever touched them. But here's the thing. Sometimes I still feel them. Not watching anymore. The connection is broken. I made sure of that. But I feel them waiting. Disappointed. Like I was supposed to be something more. Like I was supposed to complete the process. Let them fully cross over. And I realized something that keeps me awake at night. There were 342 tapes. I only made it to tape 115. What was on the other 227 tapes? What did they show? What did they prepare you for? Because the further you go, the stronger the connection becomes. The more the knocking sounds like communication. The more you start to feel like you're not digitizing tapes. You're answering a call. And I think, God help me, I think the process wasn't complete. I think if I had made it to tape 342, something else would have happened. Something worse than just being a window. I had my friend check that same audio freelancing website last week. The job posting is live again. Same wording, same pay. They're looking for someone new. Someone who will make it further than I did. If you see that job posting, if you apply, if they send you those boxes, don't follow the protocols. Break Rule 10 on the first night. Look at the screen immediately. See what they see. Maybe if you see it early enough, before you worked on enough tapes, before the connection is strong enough, maybe you can stop before it's too late. Or maybe you'll just give them permission faster. I don't know. All I know is this. The knocking started again last week. Even though I'm blind. Even though I destroyed the window. I hear it every night now. 3 raps on my door at exactly 1:47 a.m. And last night, I heard the scratching again. And then, so quiet I almost missed it. My name. They're still there. Still watching. Still waiting. And I think destroying my eyes didn't close the window after all. I think it just changed which side of it I'm on. Because here's what I haven't told anyone. Sometimes, in the dark, I can still see. Not with my eyes. They're gone, but I can perceive things. Shadows, shapes, movement. And I think I'm seeing from observation space now. I think I'm on their side of the window, looking back. And if that's true, then I need to warn you. If you've already applied for that job, go check your door right now. Because I can see you. I can see you reading this. And I'm not alone. There are others here with me in observation space. Hundreds of us. All the failed subjects. All the people who worked on the tapes and couldn't complete the process. We're all here, stuck between worlds, watching. And the thing is, we're so lonely. We need someone to see us back. We need someone to complete what we started. So please, if they send you the boxes, if you start the work, make it to tape 342. Let them finish. Because I can feel them preparing something. The watchers, they've been waiting for so long. And I think the next person who makes it all the way through, I think they're going to open a door. Not a window, a door. And then all of us, everyone stuck in observation space, will finally be able to come home. The knocking is at my door right now as I dictate this. 3 raps. I'm going to answer it this time. I think I'm ready to see what's on the other side. Story 5. I'm being followed by a snowman. It's the only thing that knows what I did. It was a soiree, not a party. That's what Anna told everyone, as she dished out canapes and played the perfect host. It was just a few days until Christmas, and snowing like I hadn't seen since childhood. The frost that opacified the window panes only made the inside of Anna's Tudor home feel even more warm. I sat in a leather chair and supped on my brandy while I looked out at the night. The neighbors' Christmas lights blinked red and green, and it was still snowing, more gentle now than in the morning. I sighed, knowing that would be the weather I walked home in. There was a quiet din of casual conversation that filled the room, accompanied by the Christmas with a Rat Pack, CD playing in the background. as it had been on repeat since I arrived. It was a nice evening, although I wasn't really one for socializing. I came as a favor for my sister Anna, just to help her fill seats for her little dinner party. I finished a large brandy and set the empty glass down on the doily-covered windowsill. It was nice visiting my old home, but seeing this chair without my dad sat in it just didn't feel right. His absence was an eyesore. I caught Anna as I nodded my goodbye. She smiled in return, happy that I stayed this long. I shrugged past someone I didn't bother to meet and got to the front door. Annoyingly, half a dozen other coats covered my own. I rummaged through the waterproof mound, accidentally dropping a few of the floors I did, until I found my jacket. I pulled it on me, zipped it up tight, and took my hat from the pocket. I then borrowed a pair of Anna's gloves, which had been lying on the radiator, and made a nice addition to the warm ensemble. With that, I opened the door and heaved myself into the cold night. I was immediately hit by the chill. The warmth of the old house abandoned me, and I pulled my collar high as I began to trudge down the icy pavement. Snowflakes still fell, dancing the air as they did. I ignored them, though, preferring to keep my head down as I walked the empty streets. I live in a small, affluent town in the south of England. Every antiquated house was decorated with lights and the occasional plastic reindeer, but as to keep up appearances, they made an effort to avoid seeming tacky. The year was 2006, and the street lamps still ran on sodium vapor rather than modern LEDs. Their orange-yellow glow enveloped me and gave the bitterly cold night a warm facade. As the moon was shrouded, they offered the only source of light. As such, I had to avoid the usual alleys and cut-throughs, which lay in total darkness. This added another 10 minutes onto my walk home, but I didn't mind. I enjoyed walking alone at night, especially when I knew no one else would be out in this weather. It gave me time to think about my past, which was a rare privilege. I can remember turning a corner as I started to walk up another street, which was on a fairly steep incline. Planted on the small front garden of one of the semi-detached houses was a snowman. The two large spheres which made up its body had half melted and were frozen into one. Two branches with an uncanny resemblance to the real thing had been expertly picked out to become the snowman's arms. A gnarled carrot acted as its nose, and its eyes and crooked smile were fashioned from small lumps of coal. A moth-bitten blue scarf was wrapped around the snowman's stumpy neck. A child's endeavor to protect it from the cold. I passed it without a second thought, other than to recall the many snowmen I constructed annually in my youth. The icy ground only added to the difficulty of scaling the hillside street. It was the first of many inclines I'd encounter, as my hometown was nestled among the chalk hills of the South Downs. It really was a beautiful part of the country, and suffered infrequently from snowstorms like this. When they did occur, however, they blanketed the fields in frost, giving them the same pallid complexion as the chalk cliffs. I passed a house where a party was being held, and heard Christmas pop seeping from the red brick walls. I walked from shadow into the light cast by the house's front windows, then back into shadow. Slowly, the din of the festivities faded and mixed with a harsh wind. I walked along the snow-covered streets, avoiding the pavement that had been turned slippery by frozen gutter water. It was near the end of this particular row of houses, built just south of the old prison, that I saw it again, the snowman, erected on the small patch of grass next to a driveway that barely passed for a garden. It looked nearly identical to the one before. In fact, it was same eyes, same smile, same scarf being tattered in the wind. I frowned at the similarities to the previous snowman, but didn't stop to consider it further. I continued my way home, crossing the empty road over to the miniature park that lay in the center of the red brick estate. It too was frosted over, and the petrified grass crunched under bootfield as I walked. Around halfway, I looked over my shoulder. The mist had eaten anything that lay more than 10 paces behind me. I looked forward again and continued. I lived my entire life here, and worked at the brewery that was the heart of town. I was often on delivery duty, and knew the place like the back of my hand. As such, making my way home with little visibility was easier than it sounded. A few more inclined streets later, and I was no more than a short cut through a park away from my home. My fingers felt numb, and I kept my hands lodged between my armpits for warmth. My breath came out like steam from an old train, a constant reminder, if I needed one, of the chill. I couldn't wait to step into my shower and let warm water subsume me. My path was stopped, however. A snowman came lurching into view from out of mist. It was somehow constructed in the dead center of the road, busy by day, and had the same appearance as the last two I passed. The exact same. There was really no denying it. I can remember thinking as I approached it, it was identical to the other snowmen. It was them. I now stood directly in front of it. It was at eye level, but I could see only blackness coming from its lumps of coal. I took a step back and looked it up and down. The only difference I could make out was the increase in height, which was slight but noticeable. I soon came to the conclusion that a group of kids from the same clique at their school had committed to making these same snowmen around town, perhaps in reference to a piece of media. The answer was sufficient for me back then, before I encountered what seethed behind those coals. I left this third snowman and continued walking toward the frozen park. By virtue of being born a man, in a place free from poverty, I never really felt afraid walking alone at night. But as I left that third snowman in my wake, I felt the hand of fear on my shoulder. I couldn't pinpoint its source, although my eyes now flickered around my grayscale surroundings, my brain turning every shape into an assailant. My pace hurried as I crossed the green fields and past the children's play park that lay on its far side. The silhouettes of the slides and climbing walls lingered in my mind as I pulled the woolen hat tighter around my skull. For some reason, it occurred to me at that moment that if someone was sprinting toward me from the darkness, I wouldn't hear them past the wind. This realization in mind, I hurried up onto the concrete and held my breath as I passed under the bridge. Houses lurched from my surroundings. I now walked between people's homes yet again, a family dwelling in each. This reassured my scattered mind, as the thought of my own home became its only occupant. My house was one in a row of semi-detached homes built along the side of a hill that continued up to the downs and looked out over the main road. A slate path connected the house to another, almost vertical slate path, which led down into a minuscule parking area. Because of this geographical hostility, very few old people or families with young, wandering children lived in these cliffside houses. Most of the occupants were singletons like me, ranging from their 20s to their 60s. For me, this was home, and it was now only a minute walk away. I emerged from my final street. The main road, usually eternally busy, was now empty and covered in ankle-high snow bisected by a solitary tire track. I relished being able to cross without waiting an age and made a show of it. I danced in the middle of the road, twirling and spinning, my arms in the air and my feet skirting the slippery asphalt. I opened my eyes and came to stop inches from a snowman. It stood stationary in the middle of the road. Wooden arms swayed, and a tattered blue scarf blew in direction of the wind. I backed up a few steps in horror. It hadn't been their second before. What? I muttered to myself. My words escaped me accompanied by a trail of frozen breath. I stared at the snowman, who'd been following me this entire time, usually just out of view. It stood there. I put a gloved hand to my forehead, unbelieving in what was right in front of me. I wanted to touch it. I had to touch it. That was the only way to prove it was really there, and not just a hallucinatory figment of hypothermia. As my hand approached the icy surface, I became unsure as to which option was worse. Then, my wool-covered fingertips made contact. Crunch. It was real, all right. A sudden clarity came, so intense I felt my head begin to ache. I staggered back as I realized I had seen the snowman years ago. I turned to run, but slipped on the frozen tarmac and landed hard on my front. I groaned and pushed myself up, thick blood dripping from my nose and turning the snow red. I looked up and saw the snowman, which was now in front of me again. I scrambled back on my hands and knees, then lurched to my feet. It had moved, I was now certain, not taking my eyes off it. I walked to the side in a crescent motion and reached the foot of the steep walkway. I looked away from the snowman, ascending the path as quickly as was possible on the slick stone. I stopped halfway and turned to see if it had followed. I searched the white landscape, expecting to see it peeping from behind every tree or street lamp. It was gone. I let a cold breath out and turned. The snowman was in front of me once again, blocking my path. I took a step back in fear, almost slipping back down the way I came. Panicking, I ducked under the rusting handrail and began to crawl up the inclined hill. Frozen blades of grass shattered under my body weight as I went, eventually reaching even ground. I clambered into a run and didn't stop until I reached my front door. I tore my gloves off and buried my hands in my pockets, desperately feeling for my keys. I glanced behind me as I did. The snowman now stood at the foot of the steps that led up to my door, just a meter away. I turned back around as I found the keys and fumbled them into the lock. I suddenly felt a chill envelop my spine. This time, however, it wasn't from fear. It felt like I had pressed the bare skin of my back against a cold metal wall. The snowman was directly behind me. The door swung open, and I fell inside. I slapped it shut with my boot, got up, and quickly locked it. I tried the handle, making sure it wouldn't budge. I ran through the door to my left into the living room, and straight to the wide window. From where my house was, I could see down the white hill to the main road. On the far side of it was a frozen pavement and a large brick wall, twice my height, that had only frosted overgrowth behind it. The cars at the base of the hill were covered in snow, and it was as I looked at them that I realized that the blizzard had finally stopped. I scoured every inch of the view. The snowman was nowhere to be seen. Once I was absolutely certain of this fact, I uneasily climbed upstairs, went into my bedroom, and collapsed in a heap. Every time it has snowed since, I have become a recluse. I refuse to leave my house until the last of it melts, and even then I'm weary. Every time it has snowed since, it has gotten closer to the house. The first snowfall of December began earlier today, which prompted me to finally write this. I'm scared this visit will be its last. I didn't mean to kill her. I was 19 and staying at a friend's holiday home in rural Scotland, along with half a dozen other similarly aged lads. There was a blizzard that year too, one that hit the area we were staying particularly hard. I was sent out for a last-minute expedition to the nearest off-license. I borrowed an old van we found on the grounds, which I ended up setting fire to later that night. I drove into town, but alas, all the shops had closed early. By the time I was driving back to the house, the blizzard was already in full swing. Not only was I drunk driving, I was driving while drinking. I had a can in one hand and the wheel in the other. Numerous houses dotted the stretch of forested road up to our holiday home, mostly owned by those with considerable wealth. Big gardens gave way to even bigger buildings, always Gothic in structure, that I would gawk at as I drove past. I found out the full story just under a year later. Her parents were overprotective and didn't let her out that day. She was liable to catch a cold, they said, but the snow has a magical lure to children, and that's why when her parents went to bed that night, she sneaked out. She pulled on her Wellingtons, her coat, and her favorite blue scarf. A warm pair of gloves, too. She crept downstairs and, as quietly as she could, unlocked the front door and entered a winter wonderland. It was nirvana for her. After a while of frolicking and forming a heavenly host of snow angels, she set her attention on the main event, building a snowman. A small ball was soon rolled out to form the large base, and another was similarly crafted to fit atop it. The little girl took extra care in making the head, and once it was sufficiently spherical, she got on her tippy toes and placed it like a crown on the snow body. The snowman was built at the very end of her garden, just in case an awoken parent happened to glance out a window. She was hidden in the mist and the snow, with only the full moon to illuminate her own little world. A carrot she'd cleverly taken to bed with her was stuck in to be used for the nose. The nearby coal shed served as a source for the snowman's mouth and eyes. It needed one more thing: arms. She went to houses black, cast iron gates, and slowly opened a gap just wide enough for her to squeeze through. Then she crossed the road to the forest that lay on the other side. She was too afraid to venture deep into the woods, but thankfully plenty of fallen branches were in reach. She took two back and slotted them into place. She then stood back to admire her handiwork and realized one of them was crooked. She shivered, not for the first time that night, and took it out. Then she made her way back out the front gate and to the tree lean, quickly discarding the previous branch. she found one with much more resemblance to a human arm. Overjoyed, she turned across the road. That's when I drove into her. In the flash of an eye and the screech of a brake pad, her short life was over. The van came to a sudden stop along with her heartbeat. I sat there, clutching the steering wheel until my knuckles were so white I thought they had torn clean through the skin. My mouth open and closed like a beach fish gasping for air, but I didn't say a word. Eventually, I undid my seatbelt and got out, both snow and gravel crunching underfoot. I tried to look at her body, but couldn't. It didn't look like a human anymore. I could only make out where her head ended, and her crumpled chest began from the tattered blue scarf she wore. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone. This was it. I'd been caught, and my life would never be the same. I can explain. She ran out in front of me. I barely managed to choke out. It wasn't my fault. The witness stood still judging me. Only a stone wall and the noise of the harsh wind stood between us. As my eyes sharpened the pale moonlight, I realized who had seen me. It was a snowman, as lifeless as a young girl. At that moment of realization, I almost laughed to myself. Instead, I began to cry. I knew it would stay silent. I could actually get away with this. Then, I saw a light turn on in the house. Reality struck me, and I ran back to the van and leapt behind the wheel. While I was gone, my friends had found a stash of old malt whiskey in the cellar. When I arrived, half of them were asleep, and the rest had the cognitive function of the first half. They couldn't speak beyond slurred moans, and certainly couldn't recall my absence to the police the next morning. I did get away with it. I really did. I was hysterical in the aftermath, but learned to bury any memory of what happened. I tried never to dwell, and eternally told myself that it was an uncontrollable accident. That night in 2006 was the first time seeing my silent witness since it had happened. It has been following me ever since, getting a little closer every time it snows. I have no idea what it's going to do when it finds me in here, but I fear I'm about to find out, for I have just heard the tapping of a tree branch against my window. Story 6. I was part of a response team sent to a secret facility due to an outbreak. What we discovered should never exist, and now they're free. I don't know how much time I have. My hands won't stop shaking, and my lungs burn like I breathed in fire. But I need to get this out, because I don't know if I'll make it out of the woods alive before whatever's moving in the Trillium finds me. If you're reading this, you need to understand. Everything about Helix Ion Labs wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a conspiracy theory, it was real. And we released something that should have stayed buried forever. I was part of a 5-man response team. Commander Coleman, Matthews, Fields, Torres, and me. We were sent out in response to a containment breach at a classified facility. Comms dead, casualties unknown. The kind of call we train for, but prey never comes. The classified facility called Helix Ion Labs wasn't some civilian facility. It was government funded, buried under 50 feet of reinforced concrete. In the middle of nowhere, genetic research, experimental evolution, stuff that should only exist in movies and fantasy. I'd heard the rumors, gene-spliced animals, human-animal hybrids, soldiers built to survive anything. I thought it was sci-fi nonsense, but I had no clue how wrong I was. We touched down just after dawn. The fog sat low and heavy, swallowing sound before it reached the trees. The steel gate hung open, bent outward, like something had forced its way out. Coleman informed us about the mission before we entered. We are to rescue any survivors, figure out what happened, find the generator room, place charges down, and escape the facility through the tunnel within the generator room that leads out to the woods. Coleman explained. The door is locked with a code, which I was given. Once out, the charges should detonate, destroying the facility and everything. When Coleman finished, we headed inside. The power was down. Emergency lights washed the hallways in a suffocating red haze. There was no sound except for the soft hum of our gear and the occasional hiss of steam from broken pipes. The deeper we went, The worse the smell got. Burnt flesh, blood, rot, and something chemical that clawed its way in the back of my throat. We found the first body by reception, or what was left of it. A scientist, half his torso missing. His ribs were snapped outward like a blooming flower. His inside scattered across the floor. Someone had smeared a word across the wall, beside him with trembling fingertips. Run. Animal attack? Torres whispered. Coleman didn't even glance at him. No animal can do this. We pushed deeper into the facility, sweeping through the East Hall. Bullet casings, scorch marks, and shredded lab coats were everywhere. In one corner, a body was half fused into the wall. Flesh and concrete blended seamlessly, like they'd been made of the same substance. The elevators were twisted wrecks, so we took the maintenance stairs down to Sublevel 3, Genetics Division. Every step we took echoed, and my heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. Then we heard it, a scraping sound, metal on concrete. Field swung his light down the corridor, and for a second, I saw movement. Something pale, too fast to focus on. Stay alert, Coleman ordered. We aren't alone. Watch your six. We found another body. The bones were soft, bent at impossible angles. The skin was melting off like candle wax. Torres gagged. Jesus Christ, what the fuck could do this? Then we heard breathing. It was slow, heavy, and wrong. It stepped into view under a doorway it should have had to crouch beneath. Skin pale and almost luminous, like it wasn't meant for light. Its jaw hung, unhinged, teeth black and needle-thin. But its eyes, Christ, those eyes, were locked onto us with human understanding that froze me in place. Coleman fired first, but it moved faster than anything I've ever seen. It was on Fields before we could even blink. It began tearing into him with claws like bone shards. The sound it made wasn't a roar. It was like laughter, distorted and mechanical. We all opened fire. Bullets tore through it, but it didn't fall. It screamed a high-pitched shriek that made my vision blur. When it slipped back into the vents, Fields wasn't standing with us anymore. All that was left was a pool of shredded flesh, clothes, his gear, and blood. We pushed on because we had to, because stopping meant thinking about what we'd just seen. Once we reached the control room, Coleman found one working video file. Most were corrupted, but one still worked. A video feed from a containment cell. A man was strapped to a table, screaming, his back arcing as something in his skin seemed to shift. Then his skin split open like a cocoon, and something crawled out. Something like the thing that killed Fields. The file name burned itself into my mind. Subject 47B, regeneration trial. Torres wanted to abort, but Coleman refused. Sublevel 4 was worse. The air felt humid and alive. The walls pulsed softly, as if breathing with us. Something dropped from the ceiling. Thin, pale, faster than the eye could track. Matthews fired instinctively. The muzzle flash lit up others hanging along the walls, clinging like spiders, but shaped like people halfway through becoming something else. They crawled on all fours, bones cracking with each movement. We ran, but they chased after us, screeching. One leaped towards Torres and latched onto his legs. I turned and fired point blank, blowing half of it off him, but its tendrils were already burrowing into his skin. He screamed in pain until his voice became a gurgle. They began to swarm him, their tendrils writhing under his flesh, hollowing him out, and when they finished, they dragged what was left of him up the wall, using him like an egg sack. We sealed off Sublevel 4 and caught our breath, but Coleman kept us moving, not for the mission, but for our sanity, for the illusion that we still had control. Matthews' tracker picked up faint readings, multiple signals moving slowly and erratically. Could be survivors, I said, my voice cracking. Doubt it, Matthew replied. No one could have survived this. Coleman sighed. He's right, but we checked anyway. Then came the sound, faint at first, then rising, singing, a soft, lilting melody, out of tune but hauntingly familiar. A lullaby, one every child knows, but half a beat off, like someone remembering it wrong. The sound led us to a chamber where the air was hot and wet, reeking of decay, with cables dangled from the ceiling. Only they weren't cables. They swayed and twisted with the rhythm of the song. Something wet splattered on Matthews' shoulder. and when he looked up, he froze mid-breath. The ceiling wasn't metal. It was flesh with living tissue. The cables weren't cables. They were intestines and tongues dangling down with nerves wrapped around them. There were also dozens, maybe hundreds, of human mouths embedded in the surface, lips cracked and twitching, teeth clicking in perfect harmony. Some mouthed silent words while others sang in fractured tones, their tongues stretched downward, questing through the air. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Then they began to scream, all of them. The sound inverted, like suction turned inside out. Matthews opened fire and blood, or something like it rained down in sheets, sizzling as it hit the floor, but the mouths didn't stop. They formed words that didn't belong to any language. Suddenly a tongue lashed down, wrapping around Matthews' throat. He clawed at it, eyes bulging. I grabbed his legs and pulled. The tongue tore loose, but so did half his throat. He died immediately in my arms. The mouths began to laugh. Coleman hurled an incendiary grenade, and fire consumed the ceiling, flesh popping like oil. The singing stopped and was replaced by shrieks fading into silence. When the flames died, only two of us remained. We made it to the security wing. The backup power flickered to life. In those brief seconds of light, we saw into the reinforced cells, shapes that might once have been human or animals or both. Bodies caught mid-transformation, frozen in poses that felt painfully wrong. That's when I realized all those rumors about Helix Ion weren't wrong. The abominations in the cells were soldiers, failed prototypes. They were trying to build evolution itself, and they succeeded. We found the generator room and set charges. He ordered me to cover the door. When Coleman placed the last charge, I heard breathing from above. It began to speak with voices that didn't belong together, like switching between radio stations. It dropped down suddenly on Coleman, pinning him down with a loud thud. This one was different this time. Bigger, more complete, like the others we encountered had been prototypes or between evolving. And this was the final product. Its body was a patchwork of people, stitched together perfectly. I saw pieces, familiar ones, in its shape, faces I knew, eyes I recognized. Not dead, not alive, they were just present. Its mouth opened vertically, splitting its head in half, revealing rows and rows of needle-sharp teeth. Coleman screamed for me to run, but I hesitated. God help me. I hesitated. That's an order. Martinez, run. Use the tunnel. Code 8593. Now, go. Then it began to tore him apart, ripping through flesh and bones like butter. Coleman didn't scream. He didn't go out without a fight, stabbing it with his knife until his whole body went limp. I fired at the abomination until my rifle clicked empty. After it was finished with Coleman, who was just a pile of torn flesh and blood, it looked towards me and just stared, and then it spoke. It wasn't in words, but the last thing I heard before the blast was the creature mimicking Coleman's voice perfectly, begging me not to leave him. I don't remember entering the code on the keypad, the tunnel, or how I reached the woods. I just knew I wasn't alone when I got there. When the charges blew, the facility collapsed, but the forest moved in ways that didn't match the wind. As I watched from the ridge I found myself on, I saw shapes crawling out of rubble. There were dozens, maybe even hundreds making their way into the woods. I've been hiding for 3 hours. My radio is dead and the woods have gone silent. Like everything here is holding its breath. I'm using my phone to get this out. I've already tried calling and texting, but the services went out. The creatures probably took out the towers, cutting off anyone in the area from the rest of the world. Thankfully, the internet is still working, so posting this is my only way to warn everybody. I know releasing this information will cause me to lose my job, but I don't care. I'll do my best to keep everyone updated. If anyone is reading this, don't send help. Don't even investigate. Just spread this post around to warn everyone of what's coming and prepare your homes, because they're above ground now and they've evolved into the perfect killing machines. Story 7. Me and my buddy's Christmas trip. took a turn for the worst. Hey, folks. Just wanted to say I'm probably going to jail. Not really my fault, but heck, shit happens. Pretty sure I did everything just right. Everything that I could. Oh, well. So, to begin, I'm from a small town in Montana. Like, real small, right up by Canada. A lot of mountains, a national park. You know the kind of place. Now, my best bud is, or was, I guess, Billy. Now, Billy's dad and my dad were friends when they was kids. So me and Billy have had grown up together, closer than brothers, thick as thieves. Man, I wish he hadn't had his head blown off. Anyways, my dad and Billy's dad used to have this tradition for a couple years when they was young. In the winter, during deer season, they'd take a bunch of guns, deer tags, booze, fireworks, and food up this cabin in the mountains, get wasted, and spend a few days hunting and blowing off steam. Now, me and Billy have been planning to reenact the trip since we were about 15. Only complication is that I went and got myself a girlfriend. Now, I love Jenny, but this was supposed to be a boys-only trip. She put her foot down, though, said someone needed to keep an eye on us. She also may have questioned the nature of mine and Billy's relationship, and implied we were going to cabin to explore each other's bodies more than the mountains. Now, we're pretty open-minded folks, but reverse psychology like that is extremely effective on a pair of young men who live in a rural, God-fearing community. So we agreed to let Jenny come along. So near Christmas, I snuck out of the house into the bracing snow, got in my car, which I'd already filled with supplies when Dad was at work, and made my way to the gas station where Jenny and Billy would be waiting. Billy was there first, a towering gorilla-like figure with a few long bags, a big smile beaming at me from beneath his beard. "Hey, bud," he said, slinging the bags in as he clambered into the car. It was already a tight squeeze, just with my stuff. Hey, I said, "You brought the good stuff?" "Hell yeah, aye." "What the hell is this?" A new voice called. I leaned out, and there was Jenny. She looked beautiful, even with her big snow jacket and ski pants on. Hey, girl, what's the problem?" I called, a bit unsettled by the edge in her voice. "You said a truck. I thought you were going to borrow your dad's." I looked at the steering wheel. What's wrong with the Neon? They weren't bad little cars. A bit underpowered, especially the 1.6, and I guess they're front-wheel drive. And then there's the 3-speed, which does slip a lot, and sometimes the electric short out the engine. But other than that, it's a pretty good car. You really want to drive up to a cabin you've never been to, in the dark, in the snow and ice, in a fucking Dodge Neon? Jenny asked, sounding not quite happy with me. "It'll be fine. It gets us to and from school, don't it?" Billy added. Jenny swung open the rear door, chucking in her backpack and sitting on top of it. "School ain't up a damn mountain." I shrugged, yanking the stick into drive, and we set off with a lurch up the dark and snowy roads and mountains. "Didn't bring your phone, did you?" Billy said, craning round to grin at Jenny. "No, you said not to," she said. "And what's the deal with that? No reception up there?" "Probably is." I said, keeping my eyes on the road as it snaked ever upwards. But back when our dads was young, they didn't have phones. Just did it all with paper maps. Billy chuckled. "That's right. Proper men back then, just a couple dudes living wild." Jenny kicked the back of my seat real hard, and she glared at me in the mirror from behind her black curls. "You seriously mean we haven't got one cell phone between us?" I smiled at her vicious expression in the mirror. "That's right. I say, we're going to do it just like they did back in the day." Me and Billy exchanged a triumphant grin. "So, how the hell are we getting there without Google Maps?" "You have a paper map then?" Mine and Billy's expression fell instantly. "I can't read a map." Billy said, "I can, but I didn't have one. I'm sure it'll be fine. After all, how hard can it be to find a cabin on the mountain?" So, turned out finding a cabin on a mountain after dark when the snow started coming down hard was actually pretty tough. Got even tougher further up because the Neon kept sliding and slipping. It was getting real hard to make headway. Luckily, we had the heaters on full blast, so it was plenty warm inside. I just wish I'd remembered to fill it up when we met at the gas station. That had been the whole point. We were probably a good 20 or 30 miles up into the mountain when the car slid on ice and the engine died, all at once. Thankfully, it was on a blind corner, so I wasn't going fast enough to flip it. It did get stuck deep in a snowdrift, though we could open the driver's side doors. But everything in the trunk was stuck there. Once Jenny had finished berating me and Billy stopped laughing, I yanked open the door, telling everyone to get out. What the hell are you on about? Jenny started, not looking like she wanted to go anywhere. I gestured widely. We're here for the cabin, right? Billy was already unloading guns and the booze cooler from the back seat, pulling it past Jenny while she stared at me. Gotta be round here somewhere. I continued. She just stared as Billy started on the duffels with the food and fireworks. I know you ain't the smartest guy, she started, but this is like a life or death survival situation, okay? The car's totaled. We're stranded and have no way of calling for help. I just stood in the snow, shrugging my shoulders. Nah, Jenny, we came out for an adventure. I'm sure we'll be fine. Climbers use these cabins all the time. I bet there's a whole lot of them around here. Billy grinned up from his pile of supplies. Yeah, I vote we go for the cabin. Face was staying alone in the car waiting for the battery to die. We're following the guys with supplies. Jenny tagged along too. Billy was able to carry all the rifle bags and the cooler by himself. Great bear of a man that he was. I had 3 of the duffels, 1 on the back and 1 in each arm, and Jenny only had her backpack. But hey, we're gentlemen. It was fine for her too. She had her ski pants and jacket. Me and Billy were in jeans and flannel shirts. We had thermals and a few layers, but it was getting pretty cold and trudging through knee-deep snow was wet and nasty. Luckily, my feet were numb after about half an hour, so it felt less painful. Now, the question of where we was headed come up. I'd led us downhill, towards dense tree cover and the dark valleys that were all around here. They say follow water downstream to civilization, but in the snow the water's kind of everywhere. So just heading randomly downhill into uninhabited woodlands seemed a sensible move. It was quite pretty beneath the pines. The snow lay nestled in their branches, and the layer on the ground was thin, letting us walk as normally as possible with numb legs like Billy and I. After a few more minutes, Billy stopped abruptly, and I walked straight into his back. Then Jenny clattered into me, and the 2 of us fell in a heap. But the smile on his face and his big shining eyes made us leap right back up. What is it? A road? Rescue? Jenny asked. Better, he replied. Look. He pointed ahead, and there, in a clearing, was a cabin. It wasn't the little one-room affair of my dad's stories. This was actually a rather sprawling, decrepit single-story house that was so old it had turned gray, and where the windows were thick with an unclean layer of gunk. Good find, Billy. Let's get inside. The front door was the same sickly-looking old wood, and it was locked up tight. I tried the windows, even walked all the way around and tried the back door. Nothing budged. There was an outhouse, though, real cowboy-type shit. Well, nothing stops Billy and I when we put our brain cells to something, even as we stood shivering. I knew we had another solution. Give it a kick, Billy. His massive foot smashed through the door, sending splintered planks and with chips everywhere. The cold followed us in, snaking into the untouched interior with a flurry of snow. That was dumb, Jenny said, throwing her bag on the floor. Now we can't even close the door. It is pretty cold, I guess. But then I looked and took in place. Similar doors led to several rooms, and there were old chairs, tables, not to mention the roof and walls. Everything was made of wood, even the big trapdoor in the corner. I smiled, but we can build a fire. A few minutes later, and the little stone hearth on the left had a merry little fire going. Started with Billy's Zippo, some lighter fuel, and most of the destroyed door. We might be dumb, but growing up out here you learn the basics of fire safety. I did move the fireworks bag a bit further away, though. A cold breeze was still coming in through the door, but none of us were shivering anymore. I was even starting to get some feeling back in my feet. Jenny, though, had decided to take the Zippo as a makeshift torch and search the dark house. It was just as I was starting to relax and feel good about this trip that she called me from the other room. I told Billy to get some food going and made my way as quietly as possible through the house. in the back room. I found her stood over a desk, reading some old papers in the light of the Zippo, trying not to disturb her concentration. I moved up behind her in silence and placed a reassuring hand on the back of her neck. Her scream was loud enough to wake the dead, and she jumped so high I could swear she almost concussed herself on a roof beam. "What the fuck? Why the hell are you sneaking up on me?" she groaned, getting up from the floor, retrieving the fallen lighter. "Didn't want to disturb. You look real fascinated by that there paper. Read it." She thrust the Zippo into my hands, and I tilted it to shine over the page. October 3rd, 1911. The creature we found in the Arctic is, I believe, a parasite of some form, wholly ungodly in its ability to quickly corrupt and twist the living. It is nearly immortal. Only fire forces it to dormancy, in which case it can be handled. The hosts, of course, can be killed by common means, but the voracity of its reproduction and its infectiousness make it too dangerous to ever again see the light of day. I have sealed it in a jar of spirits, chained and boxed in the basement. If any should ever find this house, then please, by God, do not enter the basement. Groovy, what the hell are you talking about?" Jenny asked, looking at me with a smoldering frustration. "Dude who lived here must be like a writer. Maybe that HB Minecraft guy. Lovecraft was from Rhode Island. Dipshit. Besides, no one famous has ever come from Montana. I think this might be real. At the very least, we should avoid the basement until we get rescued." "Hey guys," Billy's voice came from the other room. "Come see this weird shit I found in the basement." We sat around the big 10-gallon jar, floating in booze. Jenny says spirits are alcoholic. It was a horrifying thing. It was a long, vaguely pickle-shaped mass of color flesh, and covered with sprawling, bloody tendrils. $20 and I'll chug it. Billy offered. 10. Came my counter. What the fuck is wrong with you two? The letter says it's some kind of fucked up John Carpenter thing. You die. Fine, Kurt Russell. 50 then. Billy said, crushing his can of Natty Light, and reaching into the cooler for another. Jenny rolled her eyes. Well, I offered. Ain't really anything else to do round here. You two idiots are the ones who wanted to do this. Billy looked at me. Guess we can go hunting in the morning. But I wasn't buying it. What do we do till then? He sat in silence, reflecting on the problems offered by a night without Xbox, football, or YouTube. He nodded. Let's get drunk, light a load of fireworks, and shoot at stuff. Despite Jenny's numerous objections, we at least had a solid plan, and began polishing off as many beers as we could. Drinking keeps you warm, anyway. Actually, Jenny said that weren't true, but we were still feeling warm when we grabbed a bunch of fireworks and tried to load up our shotguns with our sloppy motor functions. We had brought our deer rifles for real hunting. Our pair of Remington 870s were really just for giggles. My Uncle James always said the first rule of gun safety was, have fun. Shame about that negligent discharge. We still leave a few round to .38 special at his grave every year. Jenny decided to stay inside and keep the fire going, which suited us just fine as she was in a shitty mood. So me and Billy dragged our sack of fireworks out, plus another couple of six-packs, and started having fun. The weather was clear at last, the stars bright. If the moon works anything like the sun, which I assume it does, it was real low, so it must have been pretty early. None of us had watches. We were just blasting off shells at random sticks and branches, shooting some skeet with empty cans, when we started letting off some fireworks. Mostly just firecrackers and the odd screaming rocket at first, as me and Billy shot the shit. So anyways, he went, what's the deal with this creepy cabin in the woods? Dunno. I unloaded a few shells at a pine tree, blasting off bark. Some real Evil Dead type shit. Groovy. Nah. Probably just some mad old-timey dude with a jar full. Oh crap. You worried? Nope. He grinned. Everything's going near perfect, I reckon. But I got a little something to make it better. He dug in his gun bag and pulled out a pair of handsome little plastic pots. Behold, our salvation. I looked close, and in the moonlight I could read, Tannerite. Now, if you don't know what Tannerite is, it's just about the most fun you can have with your pants up. I don't know the science, but it's a powder that explodes when you shoot it. Probably some sort of aluminum powder mixed with a nitrate-based reactant to make a pressure-sensitive explosive. But I don't know the science. Gleefully, we mixed it up, and then Billy had the best idea of the night yet. Why don't we just shove it in the middle of all the fireworks? We could light this place up like the 4th of July. I patted the genius man on the back. Billy, my sweetheart, that's the greatest plan I've ever heard. Unfortunately, the shotguns weren't going to cut it, so I headed back in to fetch my rifle. What are you two idiots up to now? Jenny asked, looking real tired and eating a can of beans. Nothing, love, just practicing basic fireworks safety. I said, as I pulled my dear rifle, a Seiko in 6.5 Creedmoor out of its bag. And you need a rifle for that? Yup, I said, a bit too drunk to load the thing. But luckily I'd left it loaded with the safety off, just in case of such a drunken shooting session. Gonna blow up the whole pile with some tannerite. Jenny groaned, kind of folding it on herself as put her head in her hands. We're gonna die out here, ain't we? I was utterly dumbfounded. What are you talking about? This is all going great. We're having the time of our lives. I don't get why you're being so damn cranky. You on your period or something? For some reason she didn't like that and turned away, stonewalling me. Well, it was normally best to leave her to sulk, so I staggered back out, 100 feet or so from the cabin. Billy had set up a pile of all the biggest, most illegal, most deadly fireworks we had, and he promised me that 2 pounds of tannerite sat at its heart. I gave him a big hug, thanking him for the best night of my life so far. Then we laid behind a fallen tree, and I took aim. The explosion ripped across the forest, shaking snow from the closest trees. I wasn't the biggest boom, but big enough, and all the fireworks starting blasting off. Colors whizzed and screamed to the trees. Rockets wheeled crazily in the sky. It was like some Star Wars shit. For nearly a minute, explosions clapped off all around us, sparks sparkling in every color of the rainbow. I was grinning at Billy in the afterglow. Merry Christmas, bud. Merry Christmas, bro. Then we heard Jenny screaming. We rushed back to the charred snow and shot up trees to see flames burning through the open door to the cabin. Leaping in, I saw Jenny scrabbling to collect what supplies weren't on fire, but was spreading fast, dry and old as the wood was. Without thinking, eyes stinging from the smoke, I picked up Jenny and dragged her outside. The jar! She screamed. Don't let the jar break. Valiantly, Billy leapt into the now properly on fire building, grabbing the jar from the last bit of floor that wasn't on fire, as the ammunition I'd left in my gun bag started blasting from the heat. Surrounded by fire and gunshots, Billy leapt out the door into the snow beside us, landing heavily on the jar with a loud shattering sound. Now, y'all probably didn't know this, but Billy was a pretty clumsy guy, so it wasn't too surprising he'd managed to break the jar. I wasn't really focused on that, though I was staring incredulously at Jenny, silhouetted against a burning building. What the hell did you do? I managed to get out. Me! She shrieked. What the fuck is wrong with you? Your stupid fucking firework flew into the door and exploded in the fire. The place went up in seconds. This is all your fault. Hey! I said, backing up from her fury. This ain't our fault. What are the chances of a firework making that shot? It's a straight-up act of God. Guys, I don't feel too good. Billy's voice came from his prone form. Jenny rushed to him, rolling him onto his back. He didn't look so good either. His shirt and layers were all torn up on his front, and the thing from the broken jar was fused to his chest, pulsating and writhing as his veins and arteries darkened to a bloody color. You think I can walk it off? He whispered as he started to shake and his ribs cracked and bones groaned. Sure, buddy. What the fuck? Jenny muttered. Please, one of you must have bought a phone. Do we need to call an ambulance or something? Oh God, oh God, oh God. Nah, I said as Billy started convulsing, flesh on his arms tearing as they grew long and thin. Billy'll be just fine. He's strong as an oak. Ain't that right, Billy? His arms were now 5 feet long, tipped with deadly-looking claws, whilst his chest had spread even broader, flesh bubbling until he was built like a linebacker. See? Strong as ever. But Jenny was backing up, tears streaming down her face. I leaned real close to Billy's bloated, rippling head as he stopped shaking. "All right, buddy?" In that instant, his head split vertically, from his hairline down his neck to the top of his chest, and opened an unearthly shriek to reveal a line of serrated teeth and a maw that reminded me of my ex. I leapt away, grabbing Jenny's hand and dashing through the forest, back towards where we'd left our firework supplies. Damn. I was overcome with surprise, revulsion, and horror. Billy really had gone full Resident Evil on us. "Oh, God," Jenny said quietly, pointing back the way we came. Billy was heading over, shambling and shrieking in the night, steam rising from his vertical mouth, pulling himself forward, long clawed arms digging into the trees as he used them for support. "We're gonna die, we're gonna die, she kept repeating, shaking like a leaf. I wasn't worried as much as kinda sad. The shambling, monstrous Billy saw us, eyes bulging, and then they distended from his head on phallic stalks, looking right at me. Poor Billy looked in pain. I looked at my feet, and there was his trusty boomstick. I grabbed it, heaving it up. Good old Billy had left it loaded, chambered, and with the safety off, just like Uncle James taught us. My throat caught as I looked for some final words from my best buddy. "In another life," I said, as he clawed through the woods, just a few feet from me now, "I would have loved to explore each other's bodies." The buckshot blasted apart his already bisected head, and with a groan like a falling tree, he slammed to the ground, steaming in the snow. His body sagged, reverting back to a more human-like form. Jenny and I went up to him, looking at the mess of gore that had been Billy. In the firelight, something was writhing in his ruined face. Jenny leapt into action. Quick. She grabbed his ankles. "We gotta throw him in the fire. It's the only way to stop the parasite." Well, the note had said that. So I grabbed him under the shoulders, and together we hefted the 6'5" body back to the raging inferno that had been our cabin. His blood and brains were running warm down my front, but I took no notice. I was focused on the writhing mass of tentacles trying to wriggle out of my buddy's skull cavity. Just as the thing was about to get free, we chucked him in the blaze. Instantly, the thing started squealing like a pig with its nuts stuck in a gate. There was a rancid smell of burning air, which soon gave way to a scent just like the summer hog roast. Jenny cried and cried, wrapped in my arms as the sun started to rise. A few hours later, we were back at my house. Issy, we descended the mountain on the wrong side. Turns out we were only a couple hours from town after all. Oh well, that's how things go sometimes. Luckily, my dad was at work, so we cleaned up and I made breakfast. Jenny wasn't eating any bacon or sausage. More for me, I guess. After that, Jenny insisted on calling the police. That's when things got bad. Turns out, Jenny's family had filed a missing persons report last night. So as the officers arrived, they explained I was facing kidnapping charges. Everyone had been called in to help search for her. They really weren't happy to be working on Christmas. She was practically catatonic at this point, just kind of shaking and staring at her plate. Then the question came up about what happened. And I knew the cops wouldn't buy the whole evil ancient Arctic parasite jar story. So I said we went on a hunting trip with Billy and had a little accident. They took Jenny to the station. And now they've gone to look for the remains of the cabin now. And I'm just sitting here waiting for them to find all the horrors we left there. So yeah, probably going down for kidnapping. Definitely for murder. And they may or may not bring that parasite back with them. All in all, I think everything went about as well as it could have. But this is probably still the worst Christmas ever. Not sure what the takeaway is from all this. It ain't like a story with a message. Me and Billy did everything right, made all the right choices, and now he's dead and I'm gonna be arrested. I'm sure Jenny would disagree, but what does she know? It's like that bald guy from Star Trek says, you can do everything right and still lose. That ain't weakness. It's just life. See you around and Merry Christmas. Story 8. I worked a night shift in an automated car wash. I thought the rule about staying clean was a joke about the machinery. The machinery isn't the problem. I'm writing this from the attendant booth. It's a tiny plexiglass box that smells faintly of cherry air freshener and industrial-grade soap. The main lights of the car wash are buzzing overhead, casting a sterile, white glare over the wet concrete, making the puddles look like pools of mercury. It's 3:47 a.m. There hasn't been a car in over an hour. Usually, I'd be grateful for quiet. Right now, the silence is so loud it's making my teeth ache. Across the 4-lane street, parked just beyond the reach of the nearest streetlight, is a truck. It's an old thing, the kind you see rotting in a farmer's field, with a rounded cab and fenders that curve like tired shoulders. It's not running. The lights are off, but I know it's there, and I know it's waiting. I took this job 3 weeks ago out of sheer, unadulterated desperation. You know the story. Rent's due, savings account is a joke, and my resume is about as impressive as a blank sheet of paper. The ad said, night attendant, 24/7 automated car Washington. No experience necessary. Must be reliable. It sounded perfect. Easy money. No customers to deal with except to press a button and take their cash or card through a little sliding drawer. I just sit here, listen to podcasts, and watch the world go by one sudsy vehicle at a time. My boss is an old man who seems permanently stooped, as if he spent a lifetime looking for something he dropped on the floor. His hands are gnarled and stained with chemicals. And he's got a weird, wheezing laugh that sounds like a deflating balloon. On my first day, he walked me through the place, pointing out the emergency shutoffs and the vats of brightly colored chemicals that smelled sharp enough to make your eyes water. It's a simple job, he'd said, his voice a gravelly rumble. The machines do all the work. You're just here to make sure nobody does anything stupid and to keep the place tidy. A babysitter for cars, basically. Then he'd handed me a laminated sheet of paper. It was smudged and the corners were peeling, like it had been passed down for years. The rules, he'd said, his face unnervingly serious for a moment. You follow these. No exceptions, especially at night. I took the sheet. It was short, typed out in a faded font. Night shift protocols. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The main bay lights must remain on at all times, regardless of customer traffic. The cost of electricity is less than the alternative. Do not, under any circumstances, alter the preset chemical mixtures. The ratios are precise for a reason. After midnight, the attendant booth door is to be locked at all times. Do not open it for anyone, for any reason. Use the transaction drawer only. Conduct a full cleaning of the booth and your person before the start of every shift. A clean workspace is a safe workspace. Be meticulous. I'd read them over, nodding. They seemed straightforward enough, if a little overly cautious. Standard corporate liability stuff. I figured, but it was the way he'd explained the last rule that stuck with me. He'd tapped the fourth rule with a grimy fingernail. This one, he'd said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. This one's the most important. Keep yourself, your uniform, your little box here, spotless. I mean it. Not a speck of grease, not a smudge of dirt. Nothing. He'd leaned in a little, a weird, forced grin on his face. The brushes in that tunnel, they spin fast. Don't want you getting a bit of grime on you and losing a hand to the machinery, eh? He'd let out that wheezing laugh, clapping me on the shoulder a little too hard. I didn't get the joke. How would a smudge of dirt on my uniform, inside a locked booth, lead to me losing a hand to brushes 50 feet away? It made no sense. But he was my boss, and I needed the job, so I just nodded and forced a smile. Got it. Meticulously clean. For the first couple of weeks, the job was exactly what I'd expected. Mind-numbingly boring. The nights were a slow parade of taxi drivers getting their cabs clean from morning rush. Teenagers in beat-up Hondas coming through after a late movie. An occasional long-haul trucker looking to wash off a few states' worth of road grime. I'd sit in my little glass box, to whir and spray the car wash a constant, rhythmic background noise. I developed a routine. I'd arrive 15 minutes early, wipe down every surface in the booth with disinfectant wipes, check my uniform for any spots, and even scrub the soles of my boots on the bristly welcome mat until they were clean. It felt stupid, for the old man's weird joke had burrowed into my brain. It was an easy rule to follow. so I followed it. The hours between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. are the worst. The world goes quiet. The traffic on the main road dwindles to nothing. The only sounds are the hum of the fluorescent lights and the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the tunnel. It's a lonely liminal space. You feel like you're the only person awake in the entire world. It's easy to let your mind drift. Sometimes I'd stare into the dark, empty tunnel with its giant, inert brushes looking like slumbering, hairy beasts, and a shiver would run down my spine for no reason at all. Then last night happened. It started like any other shift. The 1 a.m. rush of post-bar closed cars came and went. By 2:30, it was dead. I was halfway through a true crime podcast, sipping a lukewarm energy drink, when I saw the headlights. They were faint yellow and low to the ground, not the bright white LEDs of a modern car. They moved slowly, deliberately, pulling off the main road and into the car wash entrance lane. It was a truck, an ancient one, a step side pickup, maybe from the 50s or 60s. The kind of thing you see in a museum. But this one wasn't pristine. It was caked from bumper to bumper in a thick, wet layer of dark, reddish-brown mud, not just dirty from a drive down a country road. It looked like it had been dredged from the bottom of a river. The mud was so thick it obscured the color of the paint, the chrome trim, even the license plate. It filled the wheel wells and clung to the undercarriage in great, heavy clumps. It rolled to a stop at the payment kiosk with an unnatural smoothness. There was no engine sound, no rumble of AV8, no diesel chug, just the soft crunch of its tires on the gravelly asphalt. I squinted, trying to see the driver through a mud-streaked windshield. There was no one. The driver's seat was empty. My first thought was that it was a prank, some kids with a remote control project car, or maybe the driver was slumped down below the window. I leaned toward the microphone. "Welcome to the Night Owl Car, Washington. Which wash would you like?" I said, my voice sounding tinny and loud in silence. No response. The truck just sat there, silent and still. I waited a full minute. "Hello? Can I help you?" Nothing. A weird feeling started to crawl up my neck. I should have called my boss. I should have just sat there and waited for her to leave. But I'm a creature of habit, and my job is to get cars through the wash. A payment screen on my console lit up. A credit card had been inserted into the outdoor slot. A virtual card, the kind you use with your phone. The payment for the Deluxe Works wash, our most expensive option, was approved. My hand hovered over the Activate Wash button. Every instinct screamed at me not to press it. This was wrong. The empty seat, the silent engine, the sheer impossible amount of mud. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. But the payment was approved. The green light was blinking. My job is to press the button. So I pressed it. The plastic barrier arm lifted, and the big illuminated sign at the entrance of the tunnel switched from red to a glowing green enter. The truck rolled forward, its pace steady and unervingly precise, disappearing into the dark mouth of the tunnel. I stood up, my face pressed against the plexiglass, trying to see what was happening. The first set of sprayers kicked on with a loud hiss, dousing the truck in pre-soaked foam. Then the high-pressure jet started, blasting the sides of the vehicle. That's when it started. Chunks of mud began to slough off the truck's sides, hitting the concrete floor with wet, heavy splats. But it wasn't just mud. As the water carved away the thick crust, something else was revealed. Underneath the mud, the truck's body wasn't made of metal. It was something dark, porous, and almost organic looking, like petrified wood or blackened bone. And then from the thickest layer of mud on the truck's flatbed, something moved. It was a slow, deliberate unfolding. A long, thin appendage, no thicker than my arm, rose from muck. It was the same color as the mud, but it had a texture, a structure. It looked like it was made of millions of tightly packed bristles, like the head of some gargantuan, industrial brush. It wavered in the air for a moment before another one, and then another rose from the mud to join it. I couldn't breathe. I was frozen, my fingers gripping the edge of the console. There were 5 of them now, 5 long, bristle-limbed appendages, swaying gently in the chaos of the water jets. They looked like tentacles. The truck continued its slow, automated crawl through the tunnel. As it reached the first set of giant, spinning scrubber brushes, the appendages went to work. They didn't attack the machines. They didn't flail wildly. They moved with a horrifying, meticulous grace. One of the limbs reached out and braced itself against the wall of the tunnel. Then, with an audible, grating scrape, it began to drag its bristled surface across the corrugated metal. It was cleaning it, scraping away years of accumulated soap scum, mineral deposits, and grime. The sound was like nothing I've ever heard. It was the sound of 1,000 wire brushes on stone, a high-pitched, rasping shriek that vibrated through the plexiglass and into my bones. Another limb unfolded and reached down, scouring the concrete floor, pushing the filthy water toward the drainage grates with terrifying efficiency. A third and fourth limb meticulously cleaned the giant blue and red brushes themselves, their bristles moving against the spin, stripping them of built-up gunk until the plastic fibers were bright and new. The fifth limb seemed to be dedicated to the truck itself, methodically polishing the strange, bone-like chassis that was now almost completely free of mud. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, for the entire duration of the wash cycle. The thing, this creature that had worn the truck like a shell, cleaned the entire tunnel from front to back. It was systematic and exhaustive. The rasping, scraping sound was relentless, echoing in the enclosed space. It was the sound of something being stripped down to its most essential layer. When the final rinse cycle finished and the giant blowers at the exit kicked on with a roar, the appendages began to retract. They folded back into themselves, sinking back into the now clean, dark surface of the truck bed, disappearing completely. There was no mud left. The truck that emerged from the far end of the tunnel was clean, but it wasn't shiny. The surface didn't gleam. It was a flat, matte black, like obsidian or coal. It still had no driver, no license plate. It rolled out onto the street, made a silent, perfect three-point turn, and drove off into the night, vanishing as quietly as it had arrived. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring into the empty, dripping tunnel. My breath was ragged, my hands shaking. I tried to process what I had just seen. A truck made of bone, a creature made of brushes. It was impossible. It had to be a hallucination, sleep deprivation, the energy drink. It had to be. After my heart rate returned to something resembling normal, I unlocked the boot door. My legs felt like lead. I had to see. I had to prove to myself that I was losing my mind. I stepped out into the damp night air. The first thing I noticed was the smell. The usual scent of chemical soap and wet asphalt was gone. Instead, the air smelled sterile, like a hospital operating room. A sharp, ozonic, unnervingly clean scent. I walked to the entrance and tunnel and looked inside. My stomach dropped. It was immaculate. I don't mean clean for a car wash. I mean supernaturally, impossibly clean. The corrugated metal walls, which had always been dull gray and streaked with scum, now gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting them with perfect clarity. The concrete floor was a pale, uniform white, free of a single oil stain or dark spot. The giant, multicolored brushes, usually matted and grimy, were fluffy and vibrant, looking like they had just been installed. Even the nozzles on the sprayers, which were always caked with hard water deposits, shone like polished chrome. There was no grime, no dirt, no residue, nothing. It was as if the entire structure had just been fabricated moments ago. I ran a hand along the wall. It was smooth and cool to the touch, with no film of dirt whatsoever. My mind reeled. The rasping sound, the scraping. It was scouring, resurfacing. I stumbled back to my booth, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night huddled in my chair, jumping at every shadow, every drip of water. I tried to tell myself there was a rational explanation, but none came. No customer came through for the rest of my shift. The world remained silent. When my boss arrived at 7 a.m. to relieve me, I almost broke down and told him everything. But how could I? Hey, a haunted mud truck with a brush monster came through and detailed the tunnel. I'd be fired on the spot, probably with a recommendation for a psychiatric evaluation. He stepped out of his car, looked toward the tunnel, and paused. He squinted, his brow furrowed. "Ah," he grunted. "Looks like the overnight maintenance crew came early." He shuffled past me into the booth without another word. I just nodded, grabbed my stuff, and practically ran to my car. I thought that would be the end of it, a freakish, unexplainable event that I would eventually convince myself was a dream. But the feeling of dread didn't go away. It lingered, a cold knot in my stomach. The next night, I was on edge, but things seemed normal. The cars came and went. The rhythm of the wash was a comforting, familiar sound, but I started noticing things, small things. A woman in a minivan came through around midnight. She was a regular, a nurse on her way home from a late shift. She had a string of photos of her kids taped to the dashboard, held together with yellowing tape. I'd seen them a dozen times. Bright, colorful, happy school pictures. As she drove out of the tunnel, the light from the booth caught the photos. They looked different. The color was washed out. The kids' bright red and blue shirts were now muted, pale shades. The photos themselves looked faded and curled at the edges, like they'd been sitting in the sun for 20 years. The woman didn't seem to notice, just gave me a tired wave as she drove off. I told myself it was just the lighting, a trick of the angle. An hour later, a young guy in a modified Civic came in. He had a pair of fluffy, bright pink dice hanging from his rear view mirror. They were obnoxious, but they were his signature. I saw his car at least twice a week. When he came out of the wash, the dice were a pale, sickly salmon color. The white dots were yellowed like old ivory. The string they hung from looked frayed and thin. My blood ran cold. I started watching every car, every customer, with a growing sense of panic. A construction worker's truck went through with a brand new, bright yellow hard hat on the passenger seat. It came out a dull, faded mustard color, covered in what looked like years of scuffs and scratches. A teenage girl had a dashboard covered in colorful, glossy stickers. When she emerged, they were peeling, cracked, and faded, as if they'd been baking in the desert sun for a decade. The old man's joke suddenly clicked into place in my head, and it wasn't funny anymore. Don't want you getting a bit of grime on you, and losing a hand to the machinery. He wasn't talking about the brushes. He was talking about the cleaning. If you have dirt on you, you become something that needs to be cleaned. And what happens when that thing cleans a living being? What part of you does it scrape away? A hand? An arm? Your memories? Your youth? The realization hit me with the force of a blow. I felt sick. I wanted to run, to quit, to never come back to this place. But I was frozen in a state of morbid, terrified curiosity. I had to get through the shift. The last car of the night was a young couple in a brand new SUV. It still had the temporary paper license plate in the back window. The girl had a small, vibrant green succulent in a little ceramic pot on her dashboard. It was a cute, trendy little decoration. I watched them go into the tunnel, my heart pounding a frantic, sick rhythm against my ribs. I held my breath as they came out the other side. The SUV was gleaming, spotless. The couple was laughing about something. Then the girl stopped. She leaned forward, her laughter dying on her lips. She poked at the little pot on her dash. From my booth, I could see it clearly. The succulent, once green and full of life, was now a shriveled brown and utterly dead husk. The soil was dry and cracked. The little plant had been scrubbed of its life. The girl looked confused, then sad. She picked up the pot, showed it to the guy driving, who just shrugged. They drove off, another victim of the world's most thorough car wash. I knew then that I couldn't work here anymore. I was done. I would wait until my boss came in the morning, make up some excuse, and just leave. I would never look back. The last hour of my shift was the longest of my life. I didn't listen to any podcasts. I just sat there, staring out at the empty street, my mind racing. The silence was back, heavier and more menacing than ever before. Every drip of water from the tunnel sounded like a footstep. At 3:47 a.m., I saw it. It wasn't the headlights this time. It was just a shape detaching itself from the deeper darkness across the street. The old truck. It pulled up silently, parking in the shadows of a closed-down diner, directly opposite me. Its engine was off. Its lights were out. It was just sitting there, motionless, watching. My breath hitched in my throat. My blood turned to ice water. It wasn't in the customer lane. It wasn't here for a wash. The tunnel was already pristine. The truck was clean. So why was it here? A cold wave of pure terror washed over me. I stood up, my eyes locked on the silent, dark shape of the truck. My gaze darted around the inside of my booth, a frantic animal instinct taking over. Check the locks. Check the windows. It was here for something. What was it here for? My eyes scanned my little plexiglass world. The clean console, the white down counter, the spotless floor. I followed the old man's rule. I was meticulous. I was safe. My gaze fell upon my uniform, my standard issue, dark blue work shirt and pants. I scanned them desperately, looking for any stray grease, any dirt. They were clean. I checked them when I came on shift. But then I saw it. On the cuff of my left pant leg, just above my boot, was a small, almost invisible smudge. It was a dark, reddish brown, the same color as the mud from the truck. I must have brushed against the tunnel entrance when I went to inspect it last night. A tiny, insignificant speck of filth. I stared at the smudge, my mind refusing to make the connection. But it was there, undeniable. A single point of impurity in an otherwise sterile environment. My head snapped up, my eyes finding the truck across the street again. It hadn't moved. It was still just waiting, patient, silent. And I finally understood. The truck wasn't here for the car wash. The tunnel was cleaned. The brushes were clean. Everything was clean, except me. It's 4:12 a.m. now. The truck is still there. I haven't taken my eyes off it. I know, with a certainty that chills me to the very marrow of my bones, what it's waiting for. I have a smudge of mud on my pants, and the cleaner is here to take care of it. I don't think it will stop at my pant leg. I think it will be meticulous. Story 9, The Scratches in Woodbrook. Have you ever had some childhood memories that you can't quite explain, or memories that you prefer to forget? Now, I know that this sounds cliche, but I have some. And I am writing this instead of writing out my college essay, but I have like a month. So I say it is pretty reasonable for me to procrastinate on it. Anyway, so I grew up in a small little town in southern Iowa called Woodbrook. I'll split my memories up using bold headers, if you can call them headers. May 25-27, Th 2013. I was 8 years old at this time and had just gotten off of school. I was pretty excited for the summer, which meant ice cream and playing on my iPad. Of course, my parents would be trying to drag me out of the house to go do stuff. But I really didn't want to do any of that, because from what I can remember from my reasoning, I didn't like ticks. For what I think was hours after school, I just watched YouTube and played games on my iPad. By the time the sun was setting, my mom called my name for dinner, and I ran downstairs to quickly eat dinner. What transpired was my mom trying to get me to eat all my foods. As I ate, I kept looking into the forest for some reason. I don't exactly remember why. Maybe I saw something, or maybe I just felt compelled. Nevertheless, after eating dinner, my mom made me brush my teeth, take a bath. And then for another hour or so, I think I played on my iPad, and eventually I went to sleep. Now, the main weird, unexplainable part of this was my dream. Even now I can still remember it, as if it was just a regular memory. I was in a treehouse, speaking with my friends and an older woman. She looked to be around the age of the college students I would see throw rocks into the old creek. She just kept saying stuff to me, but I didn't understand them. She kept saying gibberish. We were all looking at a weird scratch in the floor of the treehouse, which wasn't even built back then. It looked like a trident cross with those Native American homecoming symbols. And then I could understand what she said. It was 4 simple words. Do not trust them. Now, I did not know what that understood, and when I had told my mom about that dream, she told me it was just that, a dream. October 31st, 2017. Now, I always loved Halloween and planned to trick or treat until I was 18. If you were wondering, yes, I did trick or treat until I was 18, Don't make fun of me, it was free candy. Can't really argue with that. I got a costume and everything. I forgot the exact order of how this happened. It was either I went to the library first and then we got my trick-or-treat basket, or the other way around. Well, the trick-or-treat basket part is not important. So I'll admit that at the library, I spoke to librarian Mr. Harborough. Me and him had a pretty good relationship. We'd talk about stuff. I'd talk to him about school. He'd talk to me about when he was younger and used to hunt the local wildlife. He'd always fondly mention hunting me, as he put it, human-like raccoons. I always found this weird, because, shockingly, I have never seen a human-like raccoon before. Always saw it as Mr. Harborough's old age getting to him. He told me to be safe while trick-or-treating, citing the recent missing kids. I ignored this. Yes, I know I was an absolute idiot as a kid and went to go look at some books. I was in a book aisle when the books started randomly falling. Now, from what I could remember, the titles of the books did not spell out anything. They just fell. I then saw, now I could be remembering this wrong, but a shadow at the end of the aisle. It just warped and fizzled out. I did what any reasonable kid would do and took a book, checked it out, and just left. November 2nd, 2017. It was Thursday, history class, and I was getting ready for the weekend. I was talking to my best friend, Ryan. To this day, we are still good friends, about all the stuff I was going to do over the weekend. My history teacher walked up to me and told me something along the lines of, "Mike, could you take these laptops to Mr. Lewis? We're done with using them." I obliged and began walking to the computer teacher's office, which was at the end of some long hallway. On the way there, I could swear I was being followed. When I stopped, it just made the feeling worse. I looked behind me. No one. It got to the point where I began shaking uncontrollably for reasons I don't know. The intercom turned on and began playing the same tone, an ear-piercing beep. I stopped right at his door. I couldn't go further, and then the door opened. The computer teacher looked at me and took the computers, thanking me. I asked him if he was hearing the intercom, which I vividly remember was still going off. He shook his head and asked me if I was okay. I just gave him a very shaky thumbs up and walked back to my classroom. December 25th, 2017. Christmas. I was helping my mom prepare the feast. We heard something fall in the living room, and my mom told me to go check it out. I went into the living room and found that the angel we put at the top of our Christmas tree had fallen and was face down. Oh well, I'll just put it back. I pick it up and screamed as I saw its face. Carved into it was that Trident homecoming symbol thing. It was a clear carving. My mom came into the living room and saw it and assumed that I did it. Okay, fair. I did have a history of ruining stuff. I tried to convince my mom that I didn't do it, and she eventually saw how genuine I was being. So she just let it go, but told me to go to one of the only open stores to get a new one. She gave me some money, I got my coat on, and then I was off. While walking there, I slipped on some ice and nearly fell on my face, but I was caught by some older woman, looked to be around college age. I looked at her and said, "Thank you." She said, "You're welcome." Now, I had never seen her before. Woodbrook was small enough that you at least knew what everyone looked like. And I even said, "Who even are you? Never seen you here before?" A little harsh, I know, but she responded something along the lines of, "Oh, I just moved here for college. I'm Alicia, by the way, or if you want, you can call me Ale or Zia." Don't know where she got the Zia from, but I digress. I'll just refer to her as Zia for the rest of the story. She walked with me to the little corner store, asked me a bunch of questions, never really personal, but I just got some otherworldly vibe from her. Don't know how to explain it. March 12th, 2018. It was spring break, which meant no school, and me and my friends could hang out more. Now, my friend group consisted of me, Maya, Ryan, James, and Evan. We had sort of incorporated Zia in our group as well. She was present at our meetings, sometimes, when she was present. She took us down to the creek to toss rocks into with the other college students. They didn't seem to mind. Now, that night, when all the other college students had left, we prepared to leave when I saw something on the other side of the creek. It was a raccoon standing on its hind legs, but its limbs looked wrong, they were stretched longer, and it was smiling like full toothy smile. I immediately pointed this out to my friends. They looked, and Zia threw a rock at it, causing it to run away. I immediately said that was a skinwalker. Yes, I was very uninformed back then. Then, more of the creatures seemed to come back. They grabbed rocks and began to hurl them at us. Of course, we defended ourselves, hurling rocks at them. What began was a rock fight between us and these creatures. The creatures laughed like jackals. The only one who didn't hurl rocks at them was Zia, who was actually looking pissed. I could swear I could hear her mutter, "Of course." One of the creatures dashed into the creek and ran towards us. We fled because, frankly, I didn't know if that thing had rabies or some other disease. We reached the sidewalk, and a missing poster flew into my face, and I was forced to stop and look at it. It was a younger kid, a girl named Sophia. She was only 4 years old and was last seen near the old creek. But what caught my attention was what was drawn on the missing poster, that damn Triton homecoming symbol. My friends slowed to a stop, and I showed them the missing poster. We all found that weird, but then we realized Zia was not with us. My friends looked behind me and told me to look out. Suddenly, I was tackled to the floor by one of those things. It was as tall as me. It hugged me while still laughing, and the damn thing felt like wet cloth and dirt. I found it super uncomfortable, and Zia ran over and tried to pry it off of me. My friends helped, and we got it off. Zia yelled for it to get lost, and it laughed and ran off. I rubbed my elbow. I'd scraped it because getting tackled onto concrete is not a fun thing to do. Zia pulled a bandage out her backpack and bandaged me up. I thanked her. Now, we all assumed that the symbol was some cult symbol and thought of this horrifying thing that this cult was kidnapping kids to do human sacrifice. Okay, to be fair, if you saw some weird symbol on a missing poster, there were kids going missing in general, and you were like 13 to 14, you'd naturally assume that part. March 16-17 2018. I went to the library and told Mr. Harborough about the incident at the creek. He adjusted his glasses and told me that one time, those things broke into his house and thought it would be really funny to put his infant son on the roof. He had left the door unlocked, so they just waltzed in, took his son from his crib, made enough noise to wave him and his wife up. I asked him what he did to them, and he said he pumped one of them full of lead. They seemed to decide to cut their losses and grab the wounded one and leave. I then asked him if these things were normal, and Mr. Harborough said something along the lines of, "Look, I've lived here for 40 years, it's normal." Okay? I just thanked him and left. That was most certainly weird. I biked home and found a huge stack of mail on the porch. I brought it inside and decided to be nosy and look through it. A lot of it was random stuff that wasn't really important. But I remember one vividly. It was an envelope addressed directly to me. I opened it and found Polaroid photos of the creek, and then my treehouse. Naturally, I assumed it was a prank, but just to be safe, I assembled my friends together and Zia, and we went to my treehouse and climbed on in. Inside, on the floor, we found that damn Triton homecoming symbol again. It was a large carving. We began to talk about what it could be. "The cult is marking you," Maya suggested. We did not know what to make of it, but Zia pointed out that it wasn't even a trident. It was a Greek letter, the psi. I didn't know what that meant, and then she knelt down, stating that this town had both Greek and Native American influence. She rubbed her hand across the symbol, giving herself a splinter. She kept speaking to me about those raccoon things, how they were pests and how they were weird. She then said that there were other things in this town, and then she said 4 simple words, same ones from my dream. Do not trust them. I asked her what that meant, and Zia said, and I remember this vividly, they tend to want something from they just want to really lead you astray. The sky started to get overcast, and Zia stood up. Now, I was scared besides those things. I scared of what my dad would say when he saw the symbol. It took him weeks to build that treehouse, and he got pretty expensive wood. If he found out it was scratched, I would be in so much trouble. Luckily, Ryan had an idea. We snuck the garage and took paint buckets to paint the inside of the treehouse. My dad had wanted to get that done and was too busy. We could kill 2 birds with 1 stone, cover the symbol, and make my dad happy. It took us a few hours, but we finally finished painting the inside of the treehouse and called it a day. That night, I tried to get some sleep, but I kept waking up and looking at the closet. At first, I didn't know why. I just felt compelled to look at the closet. But then, as the night stretched on, it stretched as well. There was someone or something in my closet, and it seemed to grow. I decided to be brave or incredibly stupid, and get up to open my closet. I opened it, and there was nothing inside. I looked outside my window and saw it. Some man wearing a top hat which shifted to a crown, which then shifted to wearing nothing. He slipped away and I just stared, before realizing I was on the second floor. The next day, I went to the arcade to hang out with my friends. Everyone was there, except for Zia, Figures, and Evan. He was gone. We all came up with rational explanations. Maybe he got grounded. Maybe he was busy. April 2nd, 2018. The only thing that remained of Evan was a poster with his face on it. His mom had told the police that Evan did not leave his own house that night. He just vanished from his room. No sign of leaving, no sign of entry or leaving. Without much to work with, the cops could do nothing. Zia offered our friend group her condolences. James suggested we look for him. I brought up the obvious. Where would we start? Ryan brought up the old creek. Maybe they could start there. We agreed. Evan was a close friend of ours for years. We had to at least try to find him. We went down to the old creek, and I decided to take another stupid risk and get into the water. Trudged over to the other side where those damn raccoon creatures came from. My friends followed, and so did Zia. I made it to the other side first and helped the others onto the dry land. We pressed forward, obviously with caution. Ryan led the way as we pushed through the brush of the forest. Zia looked around, stating that this was stupid. Ryan states that she didn't know Evan like he did. Maya pointed out the scratches on the trees. They were formless scratches, but they looked to be artificial. What I mean by artificial is that it looked like they were made with knives and axes. Now, this seemed to confirm our occult hypothesis. But Zia brought up something. Those raccoon things were smart enough to get into a rock fight with them. What's to say they used tools? Okay, that was fair. But we looked up and saw that the leaves were rustling rapidly. There was barely any wind. Zia told us to get down and not look. We complied and some massive shadow came over us. And suddenly, dead leaves fell. Zia let us look up and the leaves were still on the trees and were still green. We looked down, dead leaves, crunchy and beige. Suddenly, I felt weird, like we were being watched, followed, studied. I began to shake uncontrollably, so much that my legs gave way. Then Maya began to shake uncontrollably. Then her legs gave way. And then the same thing happened to James. Then Ryan, only one who didn't collapse was Zia. She was breathing heavily, though. Wind rushed through the trees, so much so that it sounded like whistling. But we couldn't get up, like physically could not get up or move. Then everything went silent. Zia stepped back and told me that she can't carry us all at once. She'll need to carry us back to the other side of the creek one by one. My herd dropped. I felt an unbelievable wave of fear. I knew that if she does this, there would be a moment where only one of us would be alone, vulnerable. Zia sighed and picked out an order of who she'll carry back to safety. I was last. One by one, she slung my friends over her shoulder and walked off. Then, finally, I was alone. I vividly remember tearing up. I was scared. What person wouldn't? Not only that, but I heard something in the trees, whether it was those raccoon creatures or something else. But then, I felt myself getting slung over his shoulder. Zia had come back. I was relieved. We crossed the creek, and she put me down. I could finally stand up again. May 27, 2018. With finals finally finished, we could finally relax. All of us had accepted that Evan was gone. There was nothing we could do. We could not go further, and Zia was busy. I went to the creek for the final time and looked over to the other side, to the tree line. I saw him, Evan. He looked disturbed, traumatized. He just gave me a blank stare from the trees behind him. I saw a shadowed hand emerge and grab him by the neck. I blinked and he was gone. Never again, never would I go to that creek. Never would I forget what happened. December 7th, 2025, modern day. Now, I'm writing these memories down today because Zia reached out to me by letter. She explained that something was forgotten from town. and it really did not appreciate being forgotten. I don't want to return to that creek. I don't want to find out what this thing is. If anyone has any ideas of what I should do, please let me know. But for now, this is it for me. I thank every god out there that I moved out of Woodbrook. Story 10. Deep below, the red jungles grow. I am a solo hiker in the Western Cascades, and frequently go out to the forest near my town. The specific region of woods that I frequent is a nameless stretch of immensely dense temperate rainforest, which has almost never been disturbed by human activity beyond the felling of a few specific trees for lumber over 100 years ago, of which the massive stumps remain. It is virtually impossible to explore the entirety of even a 50 square meter stretch of woods like this, as there is just so much stuff. Each hike, you will inevitably find some novel and interesting tapestry of nature. Combine this with the fact that the full scale of the Cascadian forest stretches across hundreds of kilometers. The woods around my town have always had an air of awe and mystery to them, as well as an air of uncanniness at the sheer scale of wilderness and what could be hiding within. In addition, while it may not seem relevant now in my story, my town and the surrounding woods lie directly on top of a set of ancient fault lines stretching God knows how deep into the hundreds of millions of years old rock. This will come into play later, as I believe these fractures to be the source of my encounters. The following is transcribed from my hiking journal throughout late July of 2021, and is mostly left faithful to how it was originally written. July 23rd, wonderful woods, bobcat tracks, and mystery groves. The day was pleasant, the temperature not being too oppressive for a clear summer sky. I had decided to deviate from my normal path into the forest. Going eastward into the deeper, wetter woods were the only semblance of human activity, with the planes flying overhead. My plan was to stay out in the woods for at most 2 nights. This was the day I set out, armed with a pop-up tent, enough food and water to supply me for several days, as well as a pack of various survival tools / gear. For the majority of the day, nothing particularly unusual happened. It was just me, my bags, and my compass traveling eastwards through some of the most beautiful nature you could ever see. I saw a multitude of common critters, such as squirrels, deer, and even some old bobcat tracks in mud. However, sometime near sunset's approach, I found something rather strange. I had picked up a rather pretty granite rock to get a closer look at the crystal structure, when I noticed a series of dull crimson colored polyp-like growths on the underside of the rock where it had been embedded in the moss. These growths were small, only about 1 centimeter long at most, and with a rubbery looking texture. I had never seen anything quite like this, but it did not strike me as unexplainable. There are countless plant, insect, and fungus species in these woods, and just because I have never seen something does not mean that it is an abnormality. Still worth documenting though, even if it probably is just a cocoon of some odd insect or something of the sort. July 23rd night. Strange noises and more growths. Tonight, things have been strange, and I am starting to feel uneasy about this trip. I had set up camp in a little depression underneath a fallen cedar tree, likely blown down during the winter windstorms. While clearing sticks and rocks out of the way so I could set my tent up, I found several more of those growths. They were similar in shape and color, though now were appearing in clusters of 2 to 10 or so. In addition, these ones seemed larger, with some surpassing 2 centimeters. The sudden increase in density and size compared to where I had seen them earlier gave me an uneasy feeling, though I found it easy enough to brush that feeling aside and just set my tent up pushed to the side as to avoid squishing a few particularly large clusters. The evening was fairly uneventful, and sleep came for me fast. However, at some point I awoke in the dead of night. It was impossible to tell the time, given that a thick fog had rolled in and obscured the night sky. The first alarm that something was not off was the silence of the forest. Usually, even at night, some critter would be yapping its head off. However, now it was just perfect silence. Silence like that usually means some sort of predator is nearby, possibly a bear, or even a cougar. My suspicions that I was not alone were confirmed when I heard a call of some sort emanate from deeper down in the valley. The call was shrill, sounding almost like a squeak or a chirp with a slight warble. This sound would be repeated 3 or 4 times before stopping for a minute and then starting back up again. Hearing the chirping, my brain immediately went cougar and I froze. Even though the sounds appeared distant, I still felt more scared for my life than I had since a home invasion a few years back. Eventually, though, the sound stopped, and after what felt like an hour at least, sleep came for me again. July 24th. Downhill fast. Today was when shit really hit the fan. When morning came, I was determined to leave the area as soon as possible, as I did not want to be in the hunting grounds of what I had assumed to be a big cat. Oh, how wrong I was in that assumption. Pretty much as soon as I woke up, I was packing my things up and heading out of the valley. I believed I was going south, closer to civilization. However, I later found out that my compass had failed me. The little bearing on which the needle that rotates had gotten stuck. And in my hurry, I did not bother to check if it was actually rotating. I assumed that since I had pulled it out and it was facing directly ahead, that if I started walking in the opposite direction, I would be going south. Only after an hour of nervous walking did I think to pill out again and check. After realizing my terrible mistake, I sat down and began to hit the compass against my knee in an attempt to get the troublesome needle to unstick itself. After 3 good hits, the compass was spinning again, and that's when I noticed them, the growths. They were everywhere in the underbrush, some as massive as my hand. In addition, there were several other distinct features. There were stringy red vines only a millimeter thick snaking across the ground and up around the bases of the scraggly brush filling the hillside. There were spiny scarlet shoots the size of my finger jutting out from the moss on the logs. There were flat, dried blood-colored disc-shaped masses the size of quarters growing on the underside of some leaves. It was at this point I knew, without a doubt, that this was very much not natural. I stood up and just gazed out at the woods. Now, without the adrenaline of trying to speed walk through waist-high ferns, I saw things clearly. Red specks on everything in the woods, staring back at me like a million alien eyes. I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a disease? Was it a rare native plant? Was it honest-to-God alien life? No explanations made sense in my head. While standing there, I heard the noise from last night again, just as distant sounding. Instinctively, I turned around and looked behind me in the direction of where the noise had come from, and I saw it. I saw the thing that had been stalking me for hours. It looked nothing like any earthly creature, being instead a bizarre mass of sunburned flesh and indiscernible features. It was tall, around 2 meters so. Its body was roughly cylindrical, seeming almost bulbous. It had no arms, but instead had a pit in the center of its torso, which appeared to be full of small tendrils. In this pit, it held a small stick. The tendrils wrapped around it tightly. The creature had 3 legs, the length of which constituted the majority of its height. Each leg had 4, maybe 5 joints, being something of a gray area between leg and tentacle. The creature's head was roughly triangular in shape, being directly attached to the torso, without any semblance of a neck. It had a series of dark spots which might have been eyes arranged in a ring around the upper part of its head. I saw no discernible ears, mouth, or any other human feature. This was an unknown. Closest thing I could compare it to would be some sort of deep-sea abomination. I have no idea how long me and that thing stared at each other for, but eventually it made that same awful noise. The noise sounded the same as the previous 2 times, though now it was very apparent that it was not distant. That thing had been just a few meters from my tent last night. As soon as I heard the noise, I booked it. I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction, not minding that my pants were getting torn to shreds. I ran like my life depended on it, as I believe it very well did in the moment. The fact that the crimson vegetation was becoming more and more frequent and apparent was the least of my concerns. July 25th red held. I fell hard. I rolled down a steep hillside and into a rushing stream. My memories of this part are hazy. All I know is that I was knocked around into logs and rocks by the water until I eventually lost consciousness by fault of a boulder in the middle of the stream. When I came to, I was pretty beaten up. At least I was alive, though. The sun was rising, indicating that I had been unconscious on the river's shore for the entirety of the night. Unconscious with that creature roaming about. I was still somewhat delirious from the hit to my head, and it took a few minutes to register where I was. I looked around, and my heart sunk. There was no green anywhere, just shades of red. The alien landscape I was looking at was not large, as I could see green, still living trees a ways away. The trees within the zone of complete biosphere replacement had all died off, seeming to have been dead for a long time given the lack of remaining small branches. In place of everything earthly was a jungle of numerous distinct and seemingly thriving organisms. Everything had a somewhat fleshy appearance to it. There were the polyp-like growths I saw first, just scaled up dramatically, and now with rows of pores visible across their surfaces. There were scarlet vines which stretched out across the forest floor like a network of sickly arteries and veins. There were web-like masses stretched between the trunks of dead trees, from which bulbous sacs hung, dripping some sort of dark gray fluid onto the ground below. There was a pervasive red moss which clung to every surface it could. There were massive ridge discs jutting out at haphazard angles from the bases of dead trees. There were tall, spindly shoots reaching twice my height topped with barbed flower-shaped orifices, of which one almost seemed to begin to lean towards me. It was a mesmerizing, terrifying, and strangely beautiful sight, like a mix between gazing into the Amazon rainforest and gazing into the inner workings of a body. Seeing the subtle movements of the stalk, I could only assume was carnivorous. I began to run again. My only way forwards was through, and I paid little attention to the carnal tropics around me as I ran. I never passed through direct center, though I saw a large slab of stone with what seemed to be a fissure running down it. I assumed this to be the middle, and while running I'm pretty sure I saw a creature similar to the one that was stalking me approach the fissure, deflate its body somehow and slide in. Eventually, I reached the green once more. Now it was time for me to get home. The day was still new, and I knew that if I went directly north, I would inevitably find a Forest Service road that I could follow to civilization, as the logging woods were to the north. The rest of the day was blissfully uneventful, albeit sore and pained. I will likely keep out of my journal now, unless something else worth writing down happens, as I would currently rather focus on getting home. End of journal. Eventually I did get home. After 2 days of wandering down an abysmally curvy Forest Service road that looked like it hadn't been driven on in years. Eventually, I reached the main road and was able to pick up a ride. The driver asked me lots of questions, which was expected given my bloody, battered state. I simply just told him I had gotten lost and taken a fall, which was as much truth as he needed to know. I believe I had encountered some sort of deep-crust biosphere seeping up into the surface world. The rocks here are hundreds of millions of years old, and riddled with fault lines and rifts. Far too tight of a squeeze for humans, but not for whatever life has been evolving and festering down there, kilometers below the surface, for eons. Now, before I go, I want to share one last piece of information. There are two common plants here, English ivy and Himalayan blackberry. Both of these plants are invasive species brought over from a completely different region. In their home region, they stay under control as they are a part of the local ecosystem. However, upon being brought over to the West Coast, these plants went out of control due to a lack of predation. Now, ivy strangles trees and forms impenetrable walls of vines, while blackberries cover entire hillsides and fields and brambles. I fear that life forms which have evolved specifically to thrive in the most extreme regions possible, being compressed and heated constantly, will absolutely plunder the energy-rich and water-saturated surface world. I fear that one of these days, I will find deep red, hued growths hiding in my lawn. I fear that one of these days, I will see the red jungles grow where all the green forests once stood.